Hey, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. We are going to have yet another one of our great late night live streams tonight. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notifications bell. Let's do it.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. This should be yet another one of our great late night chats. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the way we do things on this channel, first, I give my opening remarks, what it is that I want to talk about. Then from there, we do a roll call where we find out who it is, who's watching, who's on the other side of the camera. It's always a great very international crowd, but also very domestic. We have a lot of people from the United States. We have a lot of people from around the world. Then the remainder of the show is me answering your super chat, Rumble Rant, Rockfin Tip questions for the rest of the night. So if you got something you want me to talk about in the second half of our show, send me a super chat on YouTube, send me a Rockfin tip on Rockfin or a Rumble rant on Rumble, and I will make a point of answering those questions. Every so often I do get something I can't respond to, but it's rare. And for the most part, I hope folks had a good time with the eclipse. Jenny Lynn is in the chat and she says, I hope you had a good time with the eclipse. Not every day you have an eclipse, just every so often. So it's a big deal. And, people are reading all kinds of different things into that eclipse. I'm not here to do that for you. Not an astrologer, but, if this is something that has an impact on you spiritually, I do wish you the best in such endeavors. I know this is very important to different members of our community in different ways. So let me also, for those of you who haven't heard, I've been just doing a quick announcement on each and every one of these live streams. I've been reminding people that the Center for Political Innovation, which is my organization, we are having a national 4-day educational workshop, and it's going to be in the U.S. state of Vermont. And it's at the end of the month, April 26th through 29th. It's going to be awesome. Lots of good food, lots of singing, lots of great classes. You'll get a copy of the new, very all-inclusive textbook that we are about to publish. So if you'd like to come, please register. We would really like it if you could register. The link is down below to register, and I'm dropping it here in the chat. But we do need you to register if you plan to attend so that we know how to plan for people. We still do have plenty of room left. It's not full. We have room for a decent number of people. So if you're planning to come out to Vermont, do so. We've been following up with the people who've registered. That's been going very well. I've got a meeting tomorrow night, planning meeting. It's going to be good. I think this is going to be a very good retreat. We have done a number of retreats so far as an organization, and we're getting better and better and better at them. It's going to be good. So I hope that you will join us at our upcoming retreat in the U.S. state of Vermont, April 26th through 29th. Should be good. That was just the only announcement I wanted to make. I'm on here as the leader of the Center for Political Innovation, which is a socialist education project. We put on seminars, conferences, etc. We publish great books like our new book, Who Are the Houthis and What Are They Fighting For? We want to educate people about anti-imperialism, which is the focus of these streams, right? Fighting imperialism doesn't only mean opposing war. It also means supporting countries that are raising themselves up out of poverty. It also means fighting against the imperialists here at home, fighting against the monopolistic corporations and big banks that dominate the world. Imperialism is not a policy. Imperialism is a system where the profits of big banks and corporations dominate the global economy, and development and the elimination of poverty is held back so that a small group of multinational corporations and monopolists based in the Western countries can stay rich. And opposing imperialism is what it's all about. That's what it's all about. We are anti-imperialists in our time. The Center for Political Innovation is a socialist and anti-imperialist think tank. So, we do great work. Our website is cpiusa.org. Check us out. We put out a number of different pieces. So, yeah, if you've got something you want me to talk about in the second half of our program, by all means, send me a super chat, a Rumble rant, a Rockfin tip, and I will do my best to answer your questions in the second half of the program. So I'm going to jump right into the opening remarks. I'll be keeping track of the super chats as they come in. So tonight, I thought I would respond or react to a speech that was given at UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, back in February. I believe it was February 15th, the day after Valentine's Day. The speech was given, was just put up on YouTube, and I'm going to react to it. Now, I want to preface this with a few things. First things first, right? There's a lot of awful reaction videos on YouTube that are an insult to our intelligence, right? There are so many videos of, of people playing other people's speeches, reading other people's work, and they're being completely childish, juvenile, commenting on people's appearances, commenting on people's voices, someone says something and then they pause the video and they go, oh, by that they mean, and completely misrepresent their argument. Or the person says something, they just stop the video and go, whoa, and they laugh, like training you to laugh. When people make certain arguments, laughter is not an argument, doesn't debunk anything the person says, and I'm not here to do any of that, right? As much as I might disagree with the person we're about to watch, I'm not going to talk about her appearance. I'm not going to talk about her voice. I'm not going to misrepresent her arguments. I am going to engage with what she has to say and show you where I disagree. And I already watched a lot of it because, I wanted to be prepared. And I don't agree largely, even though I have roots in Marxism and I come out of Marxism, Leninism, and anti-imperialism. I see things very, very differently than she does. The speaker that we're going to put on is Sunsara Taylor, and she is representing the Revolutionary Communist Party. And the Revolutionary Communist Party is a Maoist organization, right? You had the Communist Party, which was formed back in 1919 or right after the Bolshevik Revolution, but then a new wave of communist parties emerged in the 70s that were supporting China. The Revolutionary Communist Party was one of the new communist movement, NCM, organizations that emerged. That was a new communist party that was aligned with China. And the leader of the Revolutionary Communist Party is Bob Avakian. And Bob Avakian, his father was a federal judge in Berkeley. He was a white guy who volunteered and helped the Black Panthers, and he ran the Peace and Freedom Party, which was a political organization that ran Black Panthers for office and fundraised for Black Panthers. He eventually started the Revolutionary Communist Party. And when I was a young activist, they were one of the first communist groups that I really spent a lot of time with studied intensely their work, etc. And they are probably, I would say, the most visible communist organization in the United States, right? If you're somebody in the United States who doesn't ever encounter communists, who's not looking for communists, the group that you will probably run into, the group that is the most in your face, loud communist is the Revolutionary Communist Party. They are the most visibly out there speaking in the name of communism organization. And their leader is Bob Avakian, and he's, probably the public face of tanky, hardline communism to average Americans. He had an event. Cornel West interviewed him for NPR for his radio show. They did an hour-long interview with him on NPR once. He had an event with Dr. Cornel West at Riverside Church. The RCP and the Revolutionary Communist Party, we call them RCP, that's their initials. They're the most visible communist group in the United States, and they're from the 1970s they started, but they've been around for a long time, and they are a very, very visible pro-communist organization. They've been around for a long time. In the 1970s, they had roughly 5,000 members. Some people estimate even maybe 10,000 members. Nowadays, their membership is probably less than 100 people. They're very small, but they're still very visible. Every time the Democrat convention, the Republican convention, they're always there protesting, burning the American flag usually. And, they actually got flag burning legalized by the U.S. Supreme Court. They're an important sect. They're a small communist group that is very small, but they're very visible. And a lot of people's understanding of what communism is comes through, interacting with the RCP, because they're just out there publicly in people's faces saying we're communists. And so I actually wrote a book very thoroughly critiquing their political line. And I called it Letter to Bob Avakian. So if you want a very thorough investigation of what they believe and why I disagree with it, I would encourage you to go read my Letter to Bob Avakian. It's available on Amazon.com. Honestly, it's one of the better books that I've written. And, I knew it wasn't going to have huge sales when I wrote it, because it's kind of an obscure topic. It's kind of communist inside baseball. But it needed to be written because many people encounter the RCP. And in a way, the Revolutionary Communist Party's politics have become kind of symbolic of the way communism in general has lost its way. In many, many ways, the communist movement is, in the United States especially, is completely out of step with the global communist movement, right? There is communism all over the world, right? You got Vietnam, the communists are in power. China, the communists are in power. In Russia, the Communist Party is the second largest political party with millions of votes in elections and big seats in the parliament. Nicaragua is led by a Marxist party called the Sandinistas. Cuba is run by the Communist Party. There's communists all over the world, but none of them talk the way the RCP talks has absolutely nothing to do with the way those folks talk. And I think the most blatant way that the communists of the United States show that they're completely out of touch with the global communist movement is that every communist government in the world is supporting Russia and Ukraine right now. Every single one. Vietnam supports Russia and Ukraine. China supports Russia and Ukraine. Cuba supports Russia and Ukraine. North Korea supports Russia and Ukraine. Venezuela supports Russia in Ukraine. Nicaragua supports Russia in Ukraine. Laos supports Russia in Ukraine. Every communist government, Belarus actually has soldiers in Ukraine, or in, the new republics fighting. So all the communists in the world support Russia and its special military operation in Ukraine. But almost none of the American communists do. And that just shows you that there's a global communist movement, and then there's Americans who call themselves communists. And there is increasingly becoming a huge gap between the two. And I saw this coming. And when I visited the World Youth Festival, the global gathering of communists in 2013, I liked what I saw there. Those were my people. And I saw that what their politics were very different than the politics that I see from communist parties in the West and in the United States in particular. And I saw that again with the World Youth Festival in 2017. I saw that again at the what do you call it? At the World Youth Festival that I was just at in Sochi, Russia, that just happened, where I met with the communists from People's Korea and Vietnam and all of that. I also want to mention, right? If you know anything about Marxism, anything, you know that the polemic is an important part of the history of our movement, right? Frederick Engels wrote a book called Anti-Düring, which was all about a guy named Düring, a popular socialist at the time named Eugen Düring, and he wrote a whole book critiquing him. Marx wrote a whole book, The Poverty of Philosophy, because there was a popular socialist at the time, an anarchist named Proudhon, and Proudhon wrote a book called The Philosophy of Poverty. So Marx wrote a polemic against him, The Poverty of Philosophy. Lenin wrote entire books about Kautsky. Lenin wrote entire books about Bernstein and about the Narodniks and about the Mensch. I mean, Marxists writing books about other Marxists or engaging with other it's just like the most common thing, right? I mean, go and read anything Marx wrote. Almost everything Marx wrote is a response to another socialist, engaging with another socialist or Marxist. Almost everything Lenin wrote is polemical. And that's why it can be difficult for people that are first getting into these types of politics to understand it, because so much of it is written in the form of arguments, right? And that's just part of the Marxist tradition. But one sign that people have absolutely no knowledge of that is I continue to see people. I even see some fool in the chat tonight. I continue to see people. I wrote a book called BreadTube Serves Imperialism, about BreadTube, about the YouTube personalities who are speaking in the name of socialism, getting millions of views on their videos and getting things absolutely wrong. And I got all these people who came at me, oh my God, why would you write an entire book about BreadTube? Oh, that's crazy. Marxists don't write books about other Marxists. Yes, they do. If you've read any Marxist history, you would know that, but they haven't, right? They learned their Marxism through watching, ContraPoints, and so they don't know this, right? And I mean, even in the chat tonight, there's somebody who said, oh my God, you wrote a book about Bob Avakian. Yep, yes, I did. Because they are the most visible, quote unquote, Stalinist or Maoist party in the United States. And they're very, very wrong on a lot of points, as you will see tonight. So if I am somebody who is going to try and defend and espouse anti-imperialist politics, I should be engaging with what they have to say and clarifying. But the main reason that people engage in polemics is because it is through polemics that you really learn. When you are comparing your ideas to somebody else's ideas, that's how you really learn what your ideas are. Sometimes the best way to learn your own ideas is by comparing them to somebody else's. However, I would argue that if you really want to learn, you have to do it in a fair way, right? So if I just put up ContraPoint's video and was like, oh my God, those glasses are crazy, I would be an idiot, right? That no one would learn anything from that. Anybody can do that. If I were to put her up on here and let her talk and then pause it and go, wah, 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 you wouldn't learn anything from that. If I were to put her on here and she would say something and then I'd pause it and say, wow, and by that she means kill all the Jews, she's a Nazi, I would be a buffoon. You wouldn't learn anything from that. You would get stupider. You would literally get stupider if I did that, right? However, what I'm doing here tonight is I'm going to put Sunsara on the screen, right? And I'm going to let her talk. And I'm going to tell you what I think about it. And in some parts, I agree with her. I think she does a good job. On a lot of it, I don't agree. You know, on some of it, I might give some additional historical context or whatever. But we're just going to engage with what Sunsara Taylor said to UCLA. Right? She went to UCLA. And you know what? I just want to give first things first. First thing first. Before I even say anything about it. Kudos to her for doing it, because not enough people are doing what she's doing, right? You can tell what they did, right? The RCP, they went to UCLA, a college campus where a lot of young people go to college. They put up posters everywhere. They went out and handed out leaflets. They got people's phone numbers, and they built an event. And a bunch of people who are not communists, and that becomes very apparent during the Q&A, came to the event, listened to a speech, and then got up and debated her and asked questions. There's not enough people doing that, right? Nobody does this. The Communist Party USA, when is the last time they've ever done anything like that? You know, the Party of Socialism and Liberation, when's the last time they did anything like that, right? So the fact that she is going out and saying, I have an ideology, I bear with me the legacy of Mao and Stalin and Lenin, and I am going to have an event where people can come and engage with that ideology. Already, she's doing 1,000 times more than most so-called communists. The bulk of American communists are sitting on the internet shouting at each other, which is a complete waste of time. And then there's another layer that are just they're part of the woke crap, which the RCP is very much part of the woke crap. But in addition to what they're actually going out and engaging with people. That is what the Center for Political Innovation was set up to do. We are set up to do what Sunsara is doing, to go out and meet new people, to have events and educate them about our ideas, to engage with them. So, you know, props to her for doing that. There's not enough people doing this, right? Honestly, I think it's, I remember years ago when I was around the RCP, when I was like 19 years old, we did this all the time. We went out and sold their newspaper. We went out and sold their books. We put up posters for events. Good. Outreach is important. And, the RCP is much smaller than the Party of Socialism and Liberation. It's much smaller than the Communist Party USA, but way more people know about them because they're constantly out there doing outreach. And so little outreach is going on. So first things first, just the fact that they did this, right? The fact that the Revolutionary Communist Party, they had this event, I respect that. May not agree with a lot of what they said, but I respect that, right? And I would like my organization, the Center for Political Innovation, to do more events like this. We do. We have events at colleges. We have a conference. Our members were out hanging door knockers on doors. Shout out to Christina. She must have put up hundreds and hundreds of door knockers in the lead up to our conference in Oregon. Good, right? We've got members that are going around and doing outreach, and we need to learn to do that better. So props to Sunsara for that. So now I'm going to put on the talk. We'll let her talk for a little bit. I do want to make sure we get to the Q&A because that's probably the most important part is the Q&A. So we might skip through some of it and go to the Q&A, but I think we'll just watch the start of it. I think at this point it's pretty clear that once Bob Avakian is with us no longer, Bob is, I think, 82 years old at this point. Sunsara is going to be the leader of the RCP. That's pretty obvious at this point. She's the public face of the Revolutionary Communist Party at this point. I know her history. She was an abortion activist, an abortion rights activist. From what I understand, she's from upstate New York. That could be incorrect, but my understanding is that she's from upstate New York. She was an abortion rights activist, and she got recruited into the Revolutionary Communist Party when she was in her early 20s. She's been with them ever since. She was kind of one of their leading voices during the protests against George W. Bush. She was a leader of the protests against the Republican Convention in New York City in 2004. And she's been just kind of their main public spokesperson since then. And it looks like Bob, the founder, Bob is 82. He's not going to be with us much longer. Human life expectancy is not that much higher. I mean, who knows? He could live to be 100 for all we know. But Bob is getting up there in age. So Sunsara is the new face of the Revolutionary Communist Party. So I'm going to use this live stream. To show you how my understanding of the world and what I believe is different than what the RCP believes. And that, I believe, is carrying out an educational purpose. So here we go.
Sunsara Taylor, a warm welcome.
It's good to see you all here tonight. You especially. Actually, revolution is possible. And if this revolution is not made soon, humanity is thoroughly fucked. Now, my name is Sunsara Taylor, and my mission tonight is to recruit you, especially young people in this room, but everybody, to dedicate this year, this pivotal year, and really your life, to learning about, fighting for, and getting organized for an actual revolution, which is the only way to win a future for humanity that is worthy of humanity. If that sounds like a big ask, it is. If it sounds like too much to ask, then you really don't understand what is happening right now. The horrors that are hurtling towards humanity, on the one hand, or the tremendous opportunity that is before us to wrench something emancipating and liberating out of this very pivotal moment that we are in. History is marked by extended periods where seemingly little changes. Generations go by one after the other. Then there are times when events accelerate, when change happens at a pace in months and even weeks that usually happens over the course of decades.
Now, I do want to mention, Terry jokingly said language, Sarah. This is actually, we'll just throw this out there. Foul language has been kind of the trademark of the Revolutionary Communist Party and their rhetoric for decades, going back to the 70s. I think that comes from their new left roots. It used to be illegal to swear in public, right? Lenny Bruce, the comedian in New York City, I think in the early 60s, he told a joke, and the punchline was "up against the wall, motherfuckers." And I think he did 5 days in jail for saying motherfuckers in public. In the 1970s, the Revolutionary Communist Party, very opposite of what they do now, but they were, in the 1970s, they were very much trying to be a working class party. Their members got jobs in factories. They wore jean jackets and ball caps. And my understanding is that especially in the 1970s, they started really encouraging their members to swear, to say fuck and shit and piss and things like that. Because they thought it was working class, because they thought that was kind of how the people talk, and that not swearing meant you were like rich and you were dignified, and you were it was like bourgeois not to cuss, and that the working class was foul-mouthed. That is just part of the way the RCP has developed. There's probably some of the 60s counterculture, because hippies were always swearing, and it was they were pushing against social norms. And then they had their working class turn in the 70s. And so that is just one aspect of the RCP. If you listen to Bob Avakian, the leader of the RCP, every other word is fuck, 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 fuck. That's just how they, that's just part of the way they present themselves, which I think is interesting, right? And I mean, I'm not necessarily opposed. I'm not, I often, when I'm giving a speech, I will sometimes use a 4-letter word as a way of getting people fired up. When I spoke the other night, I'm going to put the talk online pretty soon. I used some colorful language in my speech, so I'm not opposed to that kind of thing. But that is part of the RCP's lexicon. So much so that other people made fun of them for it. When I was, other leftist groups would go, "Oh boy, there's the RCP cussing again." They kind of made fun of them like they were like little kids, or something. But I don't know. I find it's just part of the RCP, and it goes back for many decades, right? If you read their stuff from the 70s, it's full of F-bombs. It's just, and yeah, I mean, it's just something they do. So it's worth, you're right, Terry, to notice that is a little bit, it would be one thing if that was like the climax and she just got really fired up, but no, that's the RCP. They love themselves some profanity. They love the F word. It's just kind of how they are.
These are turning points that radically alter world history. The old order unravels and is shredded apart. And if revolutionaries have been working to recognize and seize on the opportunity, then the chance emerges seemingly out of nowhere to wrench something radically emancipating out of these turning points. This is what happened with the Russian Revolution, the first socialist successful revolution. This is what happened with the Chinese Revolution, which remained on the socialist path until the mid-70s. And this is what could happen in this country, in this time in which we are living, entering into this pivotal year. Young people today are coming of age. You students are coming of age in a time that is a turning point, when humanity's future hangs in the balance. And what you do or fail to do can make all the difference between whether humanity is consumed by even greater nightmare and catastrophe than we have lived through thus far, on the one side, or whether we wrench out through our struggle out of this turning point a radical, emancipating new society and world where we can finally go to work at long last to eradicate poverty and hunger across this globe, to break the thousands of years of traditions' chains that have bound and enslaved and brutalized women for millennia, and all oppression based on gender and sexual orientation. Whether we can have the shot of ending all oppression based on race and nationality and put an end to exploitation in every form all over the world.
Now, I will take note. She did say in there, all oppression based on gender and sexual orientation. And that is certainly not how the Revolutionary Communist Party has always talked. The Revolutionary Communist Party, until about 2001, they maintained that homosexuality was a disease from capitalism, that it was bourgeois decadence, it was anti-working class. And they published a position paper in 2001 saying they no longer believed that. And that was the standard position, let me add, of communist organizations globally. Until the 80s, it was guaranteed almost that if you went to a communist country and you asked about gay rights, they would say, we don't have that here. That's a disease from capitalism. That doesn't exist, right? If you went to Cuba, you said, what's Cuba's position on gay rights? They'd say, well, we don't have gay rights. There's no gay people here because that's under capitalism. That's a thing that rich people do, decadent rich people do. It's bourgeois decadence was the phrase that was used. Bourgeois decadence, or, it was just never discussed. It wasn't until, you started having a gay rights movement in the West, and then in the 80s in East Germany, they started legalizing homosexuality. But even now, homosexuality is not technically legal in China. They don't enforce laws against it, but it's technically not legal. North Korea is certainly not jumping on the LGBT bandwagon. Cuba is very pro-LGBT. They have gay marriage in Cuba, but they don't have gay marriage in Venezuela. They don't have gay marriage in Nicaragua. They certainly don't have it in Belarus. They don't have it in Vietnam. And the RCP, they were one of the communist groups in the United States that really held on to the position that homosexuality was a disease from capitalism, or was immoral. Now, they did finally change their position in 2001. So, but what's interesting is that I don't think the RCP is pro-trans. Now, in this speech, she's going to express a lot of sympathy for trans people, and she's going to, but I feel like, the RCP, they did oppose cross-dressing very strongly. They thought drag shows were an assault on women, and I find it. I have a feeling that if you were to really press them, they're not for the trans thing. But because it's so popular in liberal circles, you're going to see her kind of pander to that, which why? I mean, if she's not pro-trans, just don't be pro-trans, right? And I've seen her get canceled online as a TERF. There was a big campaign calling her a TERF online and canceling her. So if that's the case, why not just say what you really think? I mean, you're not the only one, Terry. Many women in the global communist movement have issues with women's bathrooms, women's sports, with a lot of this stuff. And I don't think there's anything wrong with raising questions about it. And I don't think just because the liberals are in a pro-trans overdrive means that we have to embrace that. But what I think is odd is that I know for a fact that the RCP historically has been opposed to homosexuality, and even now has issues with the trans thing. But you'll notice in this speech, she just sounds like a liberal. So, why not engage? Why not say what you think? But that points to bigger issues.
All while freeing the spirit from the cell. In my talk today, I'm going to address two big questions. First, do we really need something as extreme as an actual revolution? The shattering of the old state and the complete overturning of the whole economic system, the whole political system, the whole way that people relate to each other and to the planet. Or can this system be reformed? Question two will be, is this revolution really possible? And in the course of addressing this second question, I am going to speak to not only why this revolution is possible, but why it is more possible now than it has been in generations. And in the course of this, I will talk about why we RevComs make such a big deal about the leadership of Bob Avakian and the new communism that he has forged. After this, I'll speak right down on the ground about why it is so important that you get into this revolution now. Why this is the most meaningful thing you can do with your life. I will talk about what you as students and others can do right now to radically change the way that everybody is looking at everything in this society. And I'll talk about what you can do even as you are learning about this revolution and sorting out what you think of it and where you fit into it going forward. And if this speaks to you, if this stirs something in you, I want to ask you to stick around when this program is over after the Q&A. Come down to the front of the room. We are going to have an organizing meeting right here tonight.
I'm sorry. I just can't get over that. That's an altar call. I mean, she just did an altar call, okay? And this was one of the main points I made in my book, Letter to Bob Avakian, is that there is a very spiritual and religious appeal to what they are doing. Okay. And I mean, let's just roll back. I'll show you what she said. She said, if this stirs you, if this moves you, come on down front. That's an altar call, right? That's a tent revival preacher altar call, right? And this is a group that insists on atheism, that are like, they are obsessively atheist, but they are trying to appeal to a spiritual side of people and the devotion, that people have to the RCP, and the strength of Bob Avakian in his better days as an effective activist was a kind of spiritual appeal. And when they deny that, that's what's weird about them. There's a double think. They think they're pure materialists. They think they're atheists and all of that. But I mean,
the way that everybody is looking at everything in this society. And I'll talk about what you can do even as you are learning about this revolution and sorting out what you think of it and where you fit into it going forward. And if this speaks to you, If this stirs something in you,
If this stirs something in you, hallelujah.
I want to ask you to stick around when this program is over after the Q&A. Come down to the front of the room. We are going to have an organized...
Come down to the front of the room, hallelujah. If this speaks to you, if this stirs something in you, hallelujah, come on down to the front of the room. Exactly, John. I mean, just saying, couldn't resist.
Right here tonight, because I want to talk with you about this, and I want you to have a chance to meet others who are making that same decision. So stick around. And in getting
Come on down to the front and get saved if this speaks to you. Hallelujah.
into this, I'm going to be quoting extensively from and pointing to some important works from Bob Avakian, BA, and from the RevComs. I'm going to do this because these pieces break down important and complex concepts without watering them down. And I want to do this because I want to point you to these resources that you need to be returning to. So with that, let's get into it. Question 1. Is it really true that if revolution is not made, humanity is thoroughly fucked? Or another way to put this is, can this system be reformed? Or must it be overthrown? Or, as quite a few students on this campus have put it to us, do you mean a physical revolution? With the obvious undertone that violence of any kind is really bad. So let's start with this undeniable reality. Massive violence is already happening on an industrial scale. It is the system.
And this is, I mean, she comes at this question completely wrong. Okay. And the fact that she goes here right now, right? You know, I mean, I guess I'll let her get her argument out, and then I'll tell you why I think that she is handling this very issue completely wrong. So she says she goes out on the campus and she says they're advocating revolution. And the students ask her, do you mean a physical revolution? Meaning, do you advocate the violent overthrow of the government? And now she's going to start making an argument. And this is not the correct way to handle this question. This is not genuine Marxism. This is ultra-left adventurist rhetoric.
Of capitalism, imperialism, that is the overwhelming perpetrator of unjust violence, horrific violence every day in this world. Let's start by looking at Gaza. Even before Israel began its war against the entire civilian population of Gaza, the Israeli defense minister openly stated their genocidal intentions. He promised a complete siege. A complete siege. No food, no water, no fuel for...
Yes, we get it. There's violence going on already.
Any of the 2.3 million human beings imprisoned in Gaza. He said, I quote...
This is all true. And I don't disagree with what she's saying, but this is not an argument. Like, this is the wrong way to handle the question, but we're going to let her get through it.
Quote,
she's going to tell us about all the violence that is currently going on. So that means the violent overthrow of the government is necessary. And that is such an incorrect way of handling that question. And it's not how serious organizers and revolutionaries have ever handled that question. This is like the Weatherman. This is the Weather Underground argument, right? Oh, violence is already happening. I mean, yeah, but we'll let her get through it, and then we'll give a response. But this is a very, very left adventurist way of handling the question.
We are dealing with human animals, and we will act accordingly. This is straight up Nazi talk. First, the Israelis forced 1 million people out of the north of Gaza. Then, as they bombed people, as they fled in so-called safe corridors, then they invaded hospitals. Then they desecrated cemeteries. They dropped 2,000-pound bombs on overcrowded refugee camps where people were huddled in tents. And now, with 1.3 million people crowded into the southern city of Rafah, a city that was overcrowded when it held just 200,000 people not long ago. With all these people crowded in, Israel is saying they have to flee because they are preparing a ground invasion. But where are these people supposed to go? What is there to return to besides the rubble of what once was their homes, their hospitals, their universities, their bakeries? Rubble, reduced to rubble. That's what they can return to, rubble mixed with the broken bodies and blood of tens of thousands of children and innocent women and men. The violence is already happening. This is genocide. It is the intentional killing of a whole people. And it is happening with the full backing of genocide Joe Biden and the entire U.S. ruling class. It is happening in your name. As Bob Avakian has pointed out, this is not because of the Jewish lobby. This is not because of some false and anti-Semitic notion that Jews run the world. This is happening because of the system of capitalism, imperialism, and the nature of this system. It is a system based on ruthless exploitation of people all over the world and of gangster competition between nations over who will dominate resources and key regions. The U.S. is backing Israel because Israel is a key outpost of U.S. imperialism in the strategic region of the Middle East. And if the U.S. doesn't maintain domination in that region, it is afraid of losing influence to rival imperialists like China or Russia, or even to regional powers like Iran. So it has to back this terror that Israel is raining down.
Well, it's not that simple, first of all. I'm just going to disagree with her here. I mean, this is part of her bigger point about violence, so that'll be the main response here. But this is a common thing. This is the standard Marxist answer, is that Israel is just a puppet. It's just a puppet of the U.S. imperialists. And I used to think that. I don't think that anymore. I do think that yes, Israel was set up to serve Western imperialism, but at this point, Israel has its own center of gravity. It has its own network of supporters. It has its own financial ties. You know, Israel is an entity unto itself. It's push and pull. And then on top of that, Russia and China are not imperialist, according to the Leninist definition of imperialism as an economic system. They're not imperialist. But I'll let her continue. We want to talk about her main point about violence.
Now, maybe you have noticed, like I have, that one of the biggest crazes right now in podcasts and TV is true crime. Maybe some of you are into this. I know the woman who cuts my hair is really into it. She watches it nonstop until it keeps her up at night because she's so traumatized and she can't stop herself from going back for more. Who did it? How did they pull it off? How did the neighbor figure it out? True crime. Well, I want to say, if you want to know true crime, and I'm not talking about a few twisted individuals perverted enough to want to go out and kill one or two or even a dozen people. I'm talking about a class of people, a ruling class, many of whom are very well-mannered, many of whom have degrees from elite institutions like this one, many of whom are respected by society, but who together reign over a system of global exploitation that destroys the lives of millions of children and all kinds of people all over this globe and has caused the needless murders of millions and millions of people in this world just in the time that people in this room have been alive and walking this earth. You want to talk about true crime? I challenge you to go to revcom.us and read the American Crime Series. Learn about what this country and what this system has done.
And she's not wrong at all, right? I mean, Vietnam, 4 to 5 million people killed in order to prevent a communist revolution. Korea, millions killed. The USA invaded Iraq with lies about weapons of mass destruction. It was all a fraud. The USA destroyed the most prosperous country on the African continent. I mean, the body count of U.S. imperialism. Yeah, she's not wrong at all. But let's get to the point she's making about violence, which is not correct.
And you will see how the U.S. has engaged in wars, in coups d'etats, in invasions, assassinations, death squads, and torture throughout its history. in Afghanistan, Iraq, Mexico, the Philippines, Yemen, Somalia, Congo, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Grenada, Guatemala, Panama, Indonesia, Laos, Vietnam, Korea, Honduras, Nicaragua, Iran, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and the list goes on and on. In his book, Basics, from Bob Avakian, BA, put it this way. He says, imperialism means huge monopolies and financial institutions controlling the economies and political systems and the lives of people.
Yeah, and that's not what Russia and China are. That's what the United States and Britain and France and Germany are, but that's not what Russia and China are. Imperialism, she's right, is not a policy, it's a system. And it is a system where huge monopolies hold back economic development and keep the world poor and enforce their rule with murderous wars. I mean, she's right about all of this, but let's continue.
Not just in one country, but all over the world. Imperialism means parasitic exploiters who oppress hundreds of millions of people and who condemn them to untold misery. Parasitic financiers who can cause millions to starve just by pressing a computer key and thereby shifting vast amounts of wealth from one place to another. And imperialism means war. War to put down the resistance and rebellion of the oppressed, and war between rival imperialist states.
Not at this point. There's not inter-imperialist rivalries at this point. The Europeans have been pretty well subdued by the U.S. imperialists and the British. The U.S.-British axis. I mean, I don't see the French and Germans fighting the British anytime soon. You know, I mean, American imperialism and British imperialism pretty much, that Atlanticist alliance pretty much dominates global imperialism. But she's right in describing imperialism as a system, as a parasitic financial class, you know, holding back development around the world. She's right about all of this. This is a much more scientific definition of imperialism than many people that call themselves Marxists will give you. So I give her credit for that.
It means the leaders of these states can condemn humanity to unbelievable devastation, perhaps total annihilation, with the push of a button. End quote. And today, through its backing of Israel, through its proxy war in Ukraine against Russia, and through its rivalry and brinksmanship with China, the U.S. is pushing humanity closer every day to all-out open inter-imperialist wars between imperialist powers, all of whom...
Russia and China are not imperialists. They're not what she describes, this system she describes of imperialism, of big corporations holding back development. That's not what Russia and China are doing. A confrontation with Russia, a confrontation with China, this is not an inter-imperialist rivalry, right? I mean, show me how Russia is impoverishing any country it trades with and preventing it from developing. That's just not happening. China builds up the countries. I mean, it's just, imperialism refers to a specific economic relationship. China and Russia do not have that relationship with the countries they trade with.
Are nuked up enough to destroy human civilization as we know it on this planet today several times over, and this includes the U.S. and its arsenal. We need a revolution. Or look at the environment. Now,
wait, hold up. This is going to contradict everything she just said.
Everybody knows, who is not in denial or has not been denied access to basic understanding, that we are careening towards an uninhabitable planet.
Oh, God.
Already humanity faces deadly hot spells, rising sea levels, longer droughts, and fiercer storms. Up to 1 million species are threatened with...
Wah, wah, wah. And you know who the main people saying this are? You know who the main people pushing this narrative are, Sunsara? The very financiers that you're talking about. The BlackRock are the main people pushing this narrative. And this, you know, you talked about how they move money from one country to another and cause people to starve to death. Well, when they do that, Sunsara, they do it in the name of opposing global warming. Oh my God. You know, I mean, all over Africa, people need electricity, and China goes to go build a power plant, and then BlackRock says, "Oh, we can't let you do that. We're not going to give loans to this country if they build that power plant because of global warming." I mean, you're talking about eradicating poverty from this earth, Sunsara. How are you going to eradicate poverty if people can't electrify, right? I mean, Barack Obama went to the African continent and said that, if everyone here got running water and electricity and air conditioning in a car, the planet would just overheat. So y'all got to stay poor. The global warming narrative is the main justification that the imperialists are using to keep the developing world poor, to keep people starving in Africa. You do realize that, right? And it's China that is pushing back on that. And China doesn't deny global warming. And I don't deny it. I think that there's probably an issue there. But I reject climate hysteria, number one. I don't think I don't think we're all going to die tomorrow. I think it's a problem. And number two, I say the answer is to move to a higher energy source, right? The answer is fusion energy. The answer is to get beyond fossil fuels to a more efficient use of energy that doesn't have the same side effects. And if you push the narrative that, oh my God, global warming, we're all going to die, that helps BlackRock. That helps the big corporations. I guess Chris agreed with me. That actually is she talks about financiers ruling the world and keeping people in poverty. Part of the way they do it is with climate hysteria. So I just had to get that out of my system.
Some within decades. This, too, is rooted in the system of capitalism and imperialism. This system forces big-time capitalists and governments of the major world powers to compete with each other for markets, for cheap labor, for raw material, including fossil fuels, and for control of strategic parts of the world. If they don't do this cheaply enough and ruthlessly enough to beat out their competitors, they risk going under. It's dog eat dog, expand or die. This system forces them to treat concern for the environment and long-term planning as externalities to profit.
Well, again, that may be how the lower level capitalists see it. But the people pushing global warming hysteria, the people pushing, BlackRock, one of the biggest financial institutions in the world right now, is going around telling countries they have to reduce their global crop output. They can't grow food. They can't, build power plants. They can't use their resources. And they're using their financial power to force economic degrowth on the developing world. So, yes, the lower level capitalists just want to make money. But there is a Malthusian faction among the imperialists that is using the climate hysteria to maintain their power. So, you're missing that. That's a really, really key thing in our modern world. And Russia and China and African countries are constantly complaining about how they're being kept in poverty. They cannot have economic growth because the imperialists are using climate hysteria to force things on them.
To their competitive advantage. And this leads to economic and political conflicts repeatedly. It repeatedly leads to wars, which themselves have a devastating effect on the environment. And here's a dirty little secret. The U.S. military is the single largest institutional consumer of oil in the world. You cannot solve this under this system. We need a revolution. And there is more. White supremacy, police terror, mass incarceration are built into this system.
I agree. She's right about this.
Patriarchy and oppression based on gender and sexual orientation is built into this system. Demonization and terror and deportation against immigrants is built into this system.
Sure.
And just because all this violence and vicious oppression may not be happening to you, doesn't mean it's not happening.
Okay, now we're getting to the point. Okay.
Unless and until this system is overthrown and replaced by a radically different system, a socialist system, all these horrors will continue and get worse if humanity has a future at all. So yes, we need a revolution. And yes, if we do not make this revolution soon, then humanity is thoroughly fucked. Now, revolution means millions and millions of people rising up. I'm not talking about an act of a handful. Revolution is millions and millions of people rising up, demanding the abolishment and dismantling of the current system, the abolition of its constitution and laws and government, and the replacement of all this with a radically new system, this socialist system as laid out in this Constitution written by Bob Avakian.
Right. And the millions and millions of people that it would take to overturn capitalist relations, they're not going to want a civil war, and they're not going to want violence. And generally, violent revolutions only happen when the road to peaceful transition is closed. And this is a really, really important point. And Mao makes this point in his book, Long Live Leninism. And Lenin makes this point in the book, The State and Revolution. And it's a nuanced point, but it's an important point to make, which is that we want a peaceful transition to socialism. We advocate a peaceful transition to socialism, but we recognize that that's highly unlikely. We recognize that the ruling class, in response to a mass democratic movement, will likely begin terrorizing and repressing people with violence and prevent democratic struggle from taking place. And in that context, the people have the right to defend themselves. But when someone says to you, do you want a violent revolution? Your answer, if you're a serious Marxist, if you were William Z. Foster, the leader of the Communist Party, if you're Marx, if you're Lenin, if you're Mao, if you're Fidel Castro, if someone asks a serious revolutionary, do you want a violent revolution? Your answer is no. Your answer is no, I don't want a violent revolution. I realize that one might happen, but I don't want it. I want a peaceful transition to socialism. I advocate a peaceful road to socialism, but I recognize that the ruling class may not allow such a thing, right? And that is such an important point to make. Serious revolutionaries always make clear they prefer a peaceful transition. This is a great quote from Fidel Castro. Revolutionaries don't choose armed struggle as the best path. It's the path the oppressors impose on them. Exactly. Violent revolutions only happen when the masses of people are already in motion and it's been made clear to them that they will not be allowed to peacefully organize any longer, and they will not be allowed to carry out a peaceful transition. And that is a really, really important point. And if you don't say that, right? I mean, she's saying in response to people saying, do you advocate a physical revolution or a violent revolution? She's just going, yeah, there's violence everywhere all the time. Well, so what? Two wrongs don't make a right, right? And what, I mean, there's violence everywhere, right? And that's it's a logical fallacy, okay? I mean, she's not wrong in saying that the current order that we live in under is very, very violent. And that but it's like, if I go into a store and steal a candy bar and I get arrested by the police, I can't say, policeman, there was a guy down the street who stole 5 candy bars. What are you arresting me for? He's going to say, yeah, but it's still illegal to steal a candy bar. Right. If I get a speeding ticket, when I can't go to court and fight my speeding ticket by saying to the judge, oh, I bet you're Mr. Perfect. You've never speeded before. That's not an argument, right? He's not the one on trial. I am. So, the argument about whether revolutionary violence is necessary should never revolve. I mean, just reducing it to, well, there's violence already. That's not an argument, right? That's a logical fallacy. And on top of that, it presents yourself as an advocate of violence. And we're not advocates of violence. Communists are not advocates of violence. Genuine communists. Mao formed a coalition government with Chiang Kai-shek. And, he joined the KMT. Then the KMT violently repressed them. And then they formed a united front with the KMT to fight Japan. And then after World War II, Mao wanted a coalition government. Kim Il-sung wanted one government for the entire Korean peninsula that would include every political party. And then in the South, Syngman Rhee violently repressed people and wouldn't allow it, right? Everywhere, there's violence in working class life. Working class people are the ones that have to go out and fight these ugly wars. Working class people have crime and violence in their neighborhoods, police violence, police repression. And so communists have to make clear we want to end the violence. And we would prefer a peaceful road to socialism. However, we recognize that as a real movement of millions of people advocating socialism comes into being, our ability to peacefully organize may not be tolerated, and we may have to defend ourselves. But you never advocate violence, and you certainly don't advocate violence by saying, well, there's already violence. That'd be like saying, it's not a logical, it's a logical fallacy. So let's continue.
Now, you might ask yourself, who are these millions? You don't have millions. Who are these millions who are going to make this revolution? I'll tell you who they are. They are the people right now who are gangbanging in the ghettos and barrios of this country. They're the people in the hollers of Appalachia who are strung out on opioids. They're the people like the trans youth who are terrorized and victimized. They are the women who are red hot with fury at being forced to have children against their will and denied the right to abortion. And they are people just like you in this room, just like some of your classmates. They are people who right now are not thinking about this revolution, but that can change. And if you think that people can't change in the way I'm describing, then there is a mountain of evidence throughout history that proves otherwise.
Again, she's not wrong in what she's saying. Okay, she's saying, okay, the millions of people who are going to make the revolution are people that are, she said, people that are quote unquote gang banging. I don't know if I would put it that way, but she's referring to low income African American folks that are involved in gang culture. She says people in West Virginia, props to her for mentioning low income white people. I appreciate that. Trans youth. Okay, women that get. She's saying all this, but how? Do you see all these people that she's mentioned, or all the inner city youth that are involved in gang banging, all signing up to join the Revolutionary Communist Party? I don't think so. Are the people addicted to opioids in the hollers of West Virginia, are they all signing up to follow Bob Avakian and the Revolutionary Communist Party? I don't think so. Are all these people that she's mentioning that are going to be the base of the revolution, are they all joining her organization? Are they all, and how is she going to get them to join the revolution? Right. And this is where she starts, and she's going to get them to join the revolution by fighting Donald Trump. And that's like the worst part of this. She's about to say, I'll let her use her own words. I don't want to misrepresent her words, but basically she's going to say, all these people are going to hate Donald Trump, and so they'll all, follow Bob Avakian. And that's absurd.
It proves that if there is a force that fights to awaken people's highest aspirations that are suppressed by the workings of this system, but that are there, if there is a force that works to struggle with people, to break with all the backwards ways of thinking that this system drums into them, if there is a force that does this, and it comes together at these turning point times, then yes, people can change, and they can change overnight. And this is exactly the kind of time that we are in. So I want to talk for a minute before going to the second question about what this revolution makes possible. Because here's a very heavy thing. We RevComs have been out at this campus, UCLA, for several weeks now. We've talked to hundreds of students. We've heard your questions, we've heard your objections, we've gotten into this, that, and the other. But one thing I have never heard come up from a single student I've spoken to or heard about from some of the other conversations is any young person putting forward an alternate vision of a positive future. Think about that. There is no hope among the younger generation. It's not their fault, but this has to change. So we need to talk about what revolution makes possible, how we could be living. And this is why it's important for every person here to get this broadsheet. We need and we demand a whole new way to live, a fundamentally different system, to read it, to get it out to everybody you know. Because spreading the word about how we could be living differently, lifting our sights, has a lot to do with making a better future possible. So the future that is possible with revolution.
I mean, I agree with her. It's important to be optimistic, not negative, right? To present, a positive vision. One way of doing that is putting forward a transitional program and putting forward policy solutions, things that challenge property relations. They don't do that. They just talk about vague, violent revolution. But she's right. Optimism is important.
Is characterized in this piece, and it's broken down much more fully in this Constitution. And here I want to quote from Bob Avakian himself, who describes what this new society and what this Constitution makes possible. He says, "It is a fact that nowhere else in any actual or proposed founding or guiding document of any government is there anything like not only the protection, but the provision for dissent and intellectual and cultural ferment that is embodied in this Constitution." Think about that. While this has as its solid core a grounding in the socialist transformation of the economy with the goal of abolishing all exploitation and the corresponding transformation of the social relations, that is the relations between people, how we treat each other, and all the political institutions to uproot all oppression. That's what's embodied in this. And BA goes on to quote from the Constitution itself as he speaks.
I mean, this is so, right? You don't represent anybody. All right. You're talking about you're going to need a revolution of millions and millions of people. Your group has less than 100 members, and you wrote the Constitution already. I mean, don't you think that the Constitution that will be written for the future society will be one written by all those millions of people that are in motion? Do you think one day all these millions of people are just going to run to you and say, all right, you got the Constitution already written. We got it. I mean, anyway, I might skip to the Q&A here because this is getting harder for me. I mean, this is just silliness, right? They've already got the Constitution. Oh boy. After the revolution, they've got everything worked out, right? They know exactly what it's going to be like. It's the whole making the revolution part they're not so good on. But after the revolution, oh boy, Bob's got it all figured out. This is very, very utopian. All right. This is, there's a whole pamphlet, Socialism, Utopian and Scientific. She's drawn up they've got the blueprint of the ideal society. They've got all the people, who are suffering right now. They're all going to rally around them, but this isn't Marxism. Okay. Marxism says history is driven forward by conflict, struggle between different class forces. I haven't heard her talk about economics very much at all. I haven't heard her talk about the means of production and how they function. I haven't heard her talk about, the tendency of the falling rate of profit or overproduction or any of these problems. I haven't heard her talk about any of that. I haven't heard any Marxism so far. I've heard that the world is unfair and unjust, and we need to have a violent revolution, and then we'll put into practice our great plan that we already have written up. This is called Blanquism. This is Louis Auguste Blanqui, right? She is leaving out the economic question. Marxism says that the revolution comes from the working class. It comes from the workings of the system and the working class rising up and becoming impoverished, etc. And what I'm hearing here is the world is really, really bad, and there's all kinds of violence and all kinds of people are hurt. And so I am going to, we're going to have a violent revolution. And then once we are in charge of the government, everything will be right. And that's kindergarten stuff. And that's Blanquism. And that's not scientific Marxism. So continue.
How, in addition to everything I just mentioned, the intellectual ferment, the cultural ferment, the uprooting exploitation and oppression, this new society as a whole, and the education system in particular, will provide.
All right, I think we're going to skip to the Q&A part. I'm going to skip to the Q&A because that's the most important part is the Q&A. So let's get to the Q&A. Let me see. I think there's a timestamp on the video as to where the Q&A starts. Let me go find the video. And we'll start the Q&A because that's the most important part. But the Q&A is when she starts talking about, the Q&A is where the real differences between us get to be very, very clearly articulated. So let me, all right. So the Q&A, it says it starts at 43:53. So, okay. So let me just turn this to 43. Okay, 43. Okay.
So don't sleepwalk down the path that this system has carved out for you and for humanity. Step into this revolution. Make your life count. Stick around and get into this tonight. Thank you.
Let's see a show of hands. Okay, let's start with these two over here and you two. We'll take three at a time.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction to the RevCom strategy. I was curious about whether what the role of rank and file workers would be in this revolution, if that's applicable, kind of mobilizing just workers from all sectors of American industry, is that factored into the playbook?
Okay, that's a good question.
How many communist countries have you or BA lived in, and for how long did you live there?
And the purpose of that would be, I have to say, I could say zero, but whether you...
So you don't know what you're talking about when you're talking about hey, this communism thing is great. You've never lived in a communist country.
Have you ever been at the bottom of the ocean, chained and drowning?
No, but
do you think you would like it? Do you need direct experience to know if something's a good idea or not? No,
I lived in Siberia for 2.5 years, Gulag Central.
I grew up in Venezuela during the Chavez and Maduro reign.
Right.
I know what that means.
It's horrible, right? Or did you like it?
The only reason the system itself fell was because of the greedy people that were behind it. The system itself is not the problem. So if you have something to say, listen, read.
Well, that was a poor response, right? But the main thing you have to point out is this is something that they hit communists with all the time in the United States, right? I lived under communism. I talked to a Cuban guy. He told me, and you have to point out to people that, all the polls in the former Soviet Union show that people say life was better under the USSR. Every single poll in Russia, Soviet nostalgia is at an all-time high. Every single formerly socialist country, they say that. There's massive support for the Cuban government among the population. There's massive support, and the people who flee to the United States are the ones who are at odds with the country, right? There were people in the South who thought that slavery was great and thought Abraham Lincoln was a brutal dictator. That was one side of the story, and I've debunked this many, many times, right? This is a common trope. But her saying about, chained at the bottom of the ocean, you need to respond to the common misconception in America that because the people that we meet here in the United States that are from communist countries hate those countries, they represent all of their people. They do not. And that overwhelmingly people in the former Soviet Union say life was better. There's massive admiration for Fidel Castro and Che Guevara all throughout South and Central America. And then that person talking about Venezuela, I don't even know what that was, but there was a student from Venezuela who was defending communism, but against Maduro or something. Anyway.
Last question.
Listen, man, we all came here. Listen to what the sister just said.
Emancipation that you're talking about.
I'm going to answer the first questions that were asked, and I'm going to just say I do think what the sister said here. People came here. I think most people came here to hear a serious argument, serious engagement. So I'm going to treat it that way. And I did answer the methodological flaw that if you have to experience something directly to know if it's good or bad it's not a good argument. And I think the evidence that communism would be a better system is that at the base of any society, people have to come together and organize themselves to meet the requirements of life. Under capitalism, it's done through global networks of exploitation, supply chains that enslave millions of children in the Congo. Hold on. Millions of children in the Congo to make the coltan and the cell phones, the lithium and the rechargeable, renewable Teslas and all of this and batteries. This is a system that all of our needs are met through global networks of exploitation. The food we eat is picked by migrants driven from their homelands because of the plunder that imperialism has done to most of their countries. This is not the way we have to live. The evidence that you shattered the monopoly of ownership of the massive means of production, this will get somewhat to your question too, the capitalists own these massive means of production. They're produced by millions throughout the world to create everything we need to live. But then at the end of the day, it's owned not by the people who made it, but by the capitalist class, those who own the machinery, the factories, the land, the communications, the finance structures, all of this. They extract the...
This is what her speech should have been about, right? Instead of just rambling about oppression and waving around the Constitution, she should have spent her speech talking about this.
But they extract the profit, and they are in cutthroat competition with each other to beat out their competition or be driven under, so they have to exploit ever more ruthlessly. She's
talking so fast now because it's like she doesn't think this stuff is important. This is what her speech should have been about, right? She just rambled about utopianism and the world is unfair and there's violence everywhere. She should have talked about this.
Have to drive their prices down. They have to use the environment like an externality to profit and plunder, because if they start to care for it, it cuts into their bottom line and they get driven out. It's built into the system. Cannot be reformed. Cannot be reformed. But with a revolution, you break the hold of that monopoly of ownership over the massive means of production. You still have people working collectively around the world, but it's not for profit and competition of a few, but so that people can, in a planned way, that's what's in this Constitution, decide what are the social needs of society, what should we produce to meet people's needs, what kind of medical care, what kind of housing structures, what kind of
rational planning and control of the means of production.
Agricultural needs, what kind of scientific research and medicine. You decide that consciously, collectively, not by the bottom line and competition, but by the social needs of society. And you take that social productive capacity and you put it to meeting people's needs, including all their physical needs of life, food, clothing, shelter, but also, and this is a big part of the new communism, it's also their intellectual and cultural lives. The fact that people will be brought into education, to science, to thinking and working with their minds and ideas as well as their backs and their bodies. So this is a world that's possible if you break, and it's based on the evidence of how things are today and how if you change certain things about them, you could use those same material resources, including human beings, to meet people's needs in a different way. That's the evidence of it. You don't have to have lived it to know that there's evidence for it. So that's one part of my answer. This sister who asked the first question asked, what's the role of workers in this? And I would put it this way. One of the things, look, everybody has a role to play in this revolution. Everybody who hates the system and its crimes and injustice has a role to play. And whether you come from a background of privilege, whether you come from the bottom of society, whether you come from what is a shrinking industrial workforce in this country, wherever you come from, there's a place and a role for you in this revolution. Now, we are not, in Marx's time, he made an analysis that the industrial workers were going to be the backbone force of a revolution. And that made sense at that time. The world has changed radically since then, including that there has been the development of imperialism in the world, where whole nations are basically floating above, sitting on top of the whole global economic supply chain and food chain. And the U.S. is one of these. And so you have a situation where everybody in this country, even those who are very oppressed, is living off the spoils to a degree of the people of the world. And this is especially true among many, many sections of the paid workforce, the industrial workforce, different people who were more traditionally described by Marx as the proletariat and the force for revolution. So the idea that they're going to be the most decisive force in revolution, the most decisive backbone force in it, is just doesn't correspond in the world today. I mean, there are...
This part is, she's wrong here. She's wrong, but it's really important to understand how she's wrong. Okay. There's some real nuance here in what she's saying, because she's right and wrong. She says a lot of very true things, but she's fundamentally wrong. So let's back up and let's just take this apart bit by bit.
That the industrial sense of how things are today, wherever you come from, there's a place and a role for you in this revolution. Now, We are not, in Marx's time, he made an analysis that the industrial workers were going to be the backbone force of a revolution.
Why? Marx pointed out, and this is, again, I don't know why no one talks like this anymore. Marx pointed out that the capitalist always produces more products than he pays the worker to be able to purchase. The worker cannot buy back the product he produces. That's what Marx taught, that capitalism has this built-in problem called overproduction. And I will explain it right now. That, if you have a factory that makes tires, you're going to need the material, the rubber, the materials that the tire is made from. That's A. You're going to need to ship the tires to wherever you're selling them. That's B, A plus B. And you're also going to need labor power. You're going to need to hire some workers to assemble those tires. And that's C. And then the final cost of the tire is going to be D. However, the capitalist still has to make a profit. He has to make a profit. So in order to make his profit, he has to cut in. He can't change how much, the rubber and the materials costs, and he can't change how much the shipping costs. The capitalist has to cut in to the value put into the product, into the final cost of the product, D. He has to cut into that in order to make profits. So the wages that the worker get never represent the true value that he produces, right? You got C1, which is what the worker actually gets paid, and then you got C2, which is the profit the capitalist extracts. Now, this is what we call surplus value or exploitation, right? Marx is saying that, look, C is the value that the worker put into it, but he's only getting a fraction of it. It's not fair. However, the bigger point is that C1, which is what the worker gets paid in the process of production, is always less than D, the final cost of the product. The worker cannot buy back the product that he produces. The wages paid out in the process of production are never enough for the worker to purchase the product. There's always less wages being paid than there are products being produced. There are always more products being produced than there are wages being paid out. And that's called overproduction. The worker can never buy back what he produces, right? Overproduction doesn't mean, we have so much stuff and it's too much and it's bad for the environment. No, it's this problem that the worker cannot buy back what he produces. Furthermore, the capitalist is constantly trying to reduce the role of C because he wants to make it cheaper to produce his product. So he wants to reduce labor costs. He wants C1, the amount of labor wages he has to pay out, to go down. He's constantly trying to reduce the amount of wages he has to pay. So C1 is constantly decreasing because of technological advancement. He's replacing workers with machines, and he's making the workers that do exist more easily replaceable, etc. However, as C1 goes down, and as the amount of labor that goes into production goes down, and as the amount of wages that are paid out, C2 also goes down. As C1 decreases, C2 also decreases, meaning that the rate of profit that the capitalist makes, as he eliminates labor from production, the rate of profit that he makes on each product also goes down. And this is called the tendency of the falling rate of profit. As technology advances, you get more and more product, and you get less and less wages, and you get less and less profits for the capitalist in the per product. So the capitalist has to churn out even more products because the rate of profit he's making on each product is constantly decreasing. on top of that, the worker's ability to buy back what he produces is constantly decreasing. And this all leads to what they call glut, which is poverty created by abundance. The more efficient production becomes, the easier it is for them to churn out products, the poorer people get. And this is the problem of capitalism. Self-driving cars are a great example, right? In a rational society, self-driving cars would be a great thing because there'd be less work for everybody to do. But in capitalism, self-driving cars means millions and millions of workers who support themselves by driving cars are out of work, right? That capitalism has this problem where the more efficient technology becomes, the poorer everyone gets, the lower the rate of profit that the capitalist makes on every product decreases. And eventually you get all kinds of you get a new class of permanently unemployed people. Increasingly workers don't have a role at the assembly line. And increasingly the capitalists can't sell the products that they're producing, and you have economic meltdowns, right? And the more technology advances, the bigger this problem gets. That is what Marx proved. So was Marx saying that people who work in factories are going to be the basis of the revolution? No, he's saying that this problem in capitalism, that efficiency leads to poverty. Poverty is created by abundance. Technological advancement leads to poverty. That problem where the industrial worker is constantly impoverished because industry is advancing, right? This doesn't make any sense, right? People become homeless because there are too many houses. People become hungry because there is too much food, right? I mean, people are out on the street hungry. People are homeless on the streets of this country because we've gotten so good at making products. This leads to a situation where the only possible solution is the majority of society who have to rent themselves out to a boss, the wage workers, seizing control of the means of production. First, they seize control of the state, of the government, and then with the state, they seize control of the means of production and don't operate them to make profits anymore. Right? That's what Marx was writing about. And that's in the Communist Manifesto. You go read the Communist Manifesto. You read what he says about a crisis that would have been an absurdity before, the crisis of overproduction. You read what he says about technological advancement and, the workers forming combinations. You read about what he says about the working class raising itself to the level of the ruling class and winning the battle for democracy and centralizing the instruments of production in order to raise the productive forces. It is about eliminating this problem in capitalism called overproduction and the tendency of the falling rate of profit. So what Marx is saying is that this problem that affects industrial workers, that the role of productive workers in industry is constantly decreasing, that is going to necessitate the bulk of society led by the increasingly impoverished working class to take control of the means of production. She's not really articulating that very well, but let's listen to what else she says.
And that made sense at that time.
Well, it also makes sense now. It makes sense now. It's even more true now because technology replacing human labor is far bigger. Artificial intelligence, Marx could never have dreamed of what we're living under right now. It's far more true now, this problem, that the actual problem that Marx was pointing to, that abundance creates poverty, technological advancement leads to increasing poverty. That's more true now. That's not less true now. It's more true now.
The world has changed radically since then, including...
Well, this part hasn't changed, right? This hasn't changed. What Marx actually wrote hasn't changed.
That there has been the development of imperialism in the world.
Right, and that has changed, right? Imperialism, capitalism on a global stage, that has changed. But the problem that Marx explained, the problem of overproduction and surplus value, that stuff hasn't changed.
Where whole nations are basically floating above, sitting on top of the whole global economic supply chain and food chain. And the U.S. is one of these.
See, this is interesting. She's making it see, imperialism, when she's making imperialism about the imperialist homelands, not about the colonized world. All right, she said whole nations float above. No, whole nations are held down, right? The West industrialized, and then as the Western countries became imperialist, they spread their tentacles into the third world and prevented the third world from industrializing. That's why there's people all over Central America who don't have running water, who don't have electricity, right? That's why that there's, whole parts of Africa where people are living in dire poverty. It's not that the America rose up. No, it's that America industrialized and then held back these countries. Britain industrialized and held back these countries. Whole nations are being held back, not whole nations are being lifted up. See, she's got it backwards, right? We don't want to stop countries from rising. We want to stop countries from being held in poverty, right? And when you frame it that way, let's continue.
You have a situation where everybody in this country, even those who are very oppressed, is living off the spoils to a degree of the people of the world.
No, the people of the world are prevented from having a better lifestyle by U.S. imperialism. And she's turning it on its head, right? And there's a weird nuance to what I'm saying here, right? But it's that the imperialist countries are preventing development in the third world, not that the third world has this gushy lifestyle because of imperialism, right? And you're right, she has a degrowther mentality. She thinks wealth is the problem, not poverty, right? And that is a misinterpretation, and it comes from the new left, but that poisons what she's about to say.
And this is especially true among many sections of the paid workforce, the industrial workforce, different.
Where are these paid workers? In the auto plants of Detroit? They've all closed down. Where are these good paid industrial workers, right? I mean, this is really outdated, toxic new left rhetoric.
And that made sense at that time. The world has changed radically since then, including that there has been the development of imperialism in the world, where whole nations are basically floating above, sitting on top of the whole global economic supply chain.
No, whole nations are being held down.
And food chain. And the U.S. is one of these. And so you have a situation where everybody in this country, even those who are very oppressed, is living off the spoils to a degree of the people of the world.
No, you have a situation where workers here get paid substantially higher than workers in developing countries. They get some of the crumbs, but that's not the problem. The problem is the poverty around the world. And there's a stratification of the working class and all this, but this is all ancient history. Industry in America is gone.
And this is especially true among many sections of the paid workforce, the industrial workforce, different people who were more traditionally described by Marx as the proletariat and the force for revolution.
Those folks don't exist anymore. The factories have closed down. They've replaced their labor with machines. They've sent those factories to Mexico. I'm sorry, go to any formerly industrial city in the United States. Go to Cleveland. Where are the steel mills in Cleveland? Where are the steel mills in Pittsburgh? Where are the auto plants in Flint, Michigan? I'm sorry, this is outdated rhetoric. This is from the 60s and 70s. You had the booming U.S. economy and the right-wing factory worker who supported the Vietnam War, and that's ancient history, all right? The USA has been deindustrialized, right? And it's mainly through technology, not offshoring, that the USA has deindustrialized. Let me emphasize that, right? It's not, it's not simply, they sent our jobs to Mexico. It's mainly that robots are doing it, not people. But this prosperous industrial working class that lives off the people of the third world, that's not around anymore. And even when it was around, it was a bribe. It was a bribe. It was a bribe. It was a stratification, but they were still exploited and they're gone. Right? I mean, this is new left rhetoric. This is white workers are the enemy, is what she's saying here. White workers benefit from imperialism, right? The white working class are a bunch of fat cats who live in 1950s Leave It to Beaver houses, and because of that, they're all a bunch of right wingers. That's not true anymore, right? Those neighborhoods are empty. They're full of foreclosed, empty homes. And they're racially integrated in ways they weren't before. The idea of the white suburb, that's ancient history. The suburbs are very integrated. Like this narrative that she has, this is what Bob Avakian probably taught her. And Bob Avakian, maybe felt this way in the 70s, but this is not the reality anymore. You don't have a very large industrial working class in the United States. You don't have this well-paid industrial working class in the imperialist homeland that is, loyal to empire and benefits. It's gone. Aristocracy of labor has been demolished, right? And this country is getting poorer and poorer every day, right? And this is very, very outdated rhetoric. And even the way she's framing it is wrong. She makes it sound like imperialism is about people in the West being too comfortable, not that people in the third world are prevented from developing, right? She puts the shoe on the wrong foot.
So the idea that they're going to be the most decisive force in revolution, the most decisive backbone force in it, is just doesn't correspond in the world today. I mean, there are struggles that are...
Well, it does correspond, because that same problem of abundance creating poverty and technological advancement leading to impoverishment, that same problem exists. So the essence of what Marx wrote about overproduction, the tendency of the falling rate of profits, poverty amid plenty, poverty created by abundance, that is so much more true today than it was even in Marx's time. And the fact that the white industrial middle class or whatever has been eliminated, it lays the basis for there to be more solidarity and for society to come together and seize the means of production. And she's just, this is really wrong. This is knowledge that was absorbed in the 1970s, people in the RCP, people in the SWP, people in the various communist groups. They got jobs in factories and tried to win their coworkers to communism. And there was still a large industrial working class in America at that time that didn't want to hear it. And because of that, they went elsewhere, and they decided to start recruiting college kids. They started to recruit, specific, very, very impoverished communities and stuff. But this is when I talk about the Great Retreat. This is a mistaken assumption. We're not living in 1970s America anymore. And what she's painting a picture of this prosperous white suburban middle class that are all Republicans, and support U.S. military interventions and wars and hate black people and hate Asian people. And that's not the situation anymore. Right? That white industrial middle class is gone. Society is more thoroughly integrated. And in the communities where these industries used to exist, you have much more anti-war, anti-government sentiment than even in any of the liberal pockets. So she has a completely wrong assessment of demographics of U.S. society, economically speaking, and how people think, right? The white working class, right? Or the people in Appalachia, the people in the suburbs of Cleveland, the people in the suburbs of Pittsburgh, the people in the suburbs of Philadelphia and the suburbs of Detroit are more anti-war probably than the people she's speaking to on that campus. Right. So Jenny Lynn says, I wish I was living in the 60s getting bribed by the capitalists right now. I mean, she's got a very, very outdated understanding here.
For unionization, there are struggles that are just for higher wages. And these are fights against things that are oppressive in their lives. But the communist revolution is not for better conditions of labor under the system. And it's who are the most politically dynamic social forces who want to make a revolution or could most readily be won to it. So again, I'm not writing anybody off, but in this society, I think the way it's developed, the analysis that the RevComs have is much more rooted on those who are really catching hell in the inner cities and the most oppressed communities, people who are terrorized by police and national and racial oppression, and people who are outraged against that, even beyond those. If you think about in 2020, there was obviously black people who stood up against the police murder of George Floyd, but it was like huge sections of society, a lot of white people and others. This social contradiction of the oppression of black people is one of the main driving forces for revolution. Another one is the oppression of women, which affects people all through different strata of society.
You're going to mobilize society to overthrow the government on the basis of feminism? Seriously? I mean, I am all for women having equality, and I'm opposed to domestic violence, and I think abortion should be legal. But like, you really think on the basis of feminism, you're going to overthrow the US state? You really think that? I mean, it's going to be like the Women's March, except it overthrows capitalism.
But the degradation, the dehumanization, the revanchist reassertion of patriarchy, including through the taking away of the right to abortion, which is enslavement. It is forced motherhood is female enslavement. This being hammered down on women, and just because it's not in California doesn't mean it's not happening, and it doesn't mean it's not coming here if we don't fight it and make a revolution.
So people are going to be mad that abortion is illegal in red states, and that is going to inspire them to overthrow the government. They're going to overthrow the imperialist system on the basis of being angry that abortion is illegal in red states. This is just silly.
But this is also,
sad. This is just fucking sad.
We have a slogan: break the chains, unleash the fury of women as a mighty force for revolution. This is another social force for revolution, as are the trans youth and the people who are furious.
Oh, good Lord.
Furious around the assault on LGBTQ rights. There's the youth who walked out for the climate, the scientists who are struggling around this. There are social fault lines in this system. And we call them, we've identified 5 of them, the 5 stops. One is national oppression, racism, white supremacy, police terror. One is the demonization and deportation of immigrants. One is the oppression based on gender and sexual orientation. One is the wars for empire and the crimes against humanity. You think about the beautiful, courageous uprisings against the genocide in Gaza, which need to get stronger, but this is a fault line too.
So she's basically just saying there's 5 things that people get mad about in the United States: women being oppressed, racism. She listed them. There's 5 things that people are mad about, 5 trendy liberal causes, and people will get mad about those things. And that's what's going to cause the revolution. Yeah, she doesn't mention poverty, and she doesn't mention economic demands, a program to actually improve people's lives. It's just there's going to be 5 social issues that people are mad about. And as a result of them being mad about these 5 social issues, they'll all join the RCP and violently. This is ridiculous. This is not Marxism in any conceivable way. This is Blanquism. This is adventurism. This is silly.
Struggle around the environment is the 5th. So we more identify
struggle around the environment. Seriously. So already we've listed that it's going to be 5 things that people get mad about that will cause the revolution. They're going to get mad about 5 trendy liberal causes. And then on the basis of these 5 trendy liberal causes that you mentioned, they will rally around you and make you the new government. That is not Marxism, right? Marxism says that as a result of capitalism's economic development and the development of technology and poverty amid plenty, the working class will come together. People can't pay their bills. Yeah, exactly. And they will demand a government of action that fight for working families and, an economy that is working in the interest of all of society, not the profits of a wealthy few. I mean, she has attached what should be a movement of the working class to demand an economy that works for the people. She's attaching that to woke, trendy liberalism. And that where she just started listing the 5 things that are going to make the revolution. That is like utter delusion. I mean, that's like the worst thing I've heard so far tonight is this 5 things she's listing off. Oh, yeah, people are going to be mad about abortion, and people are going to be mad about the environment. People are going to be mad.
Around these social fault lines, that cannot be resolved under capitalism more than the traditional proletariat workforce. But obviously, I hope that I've made clear that everybody has a role to play, and there will be people from among the industrial workforce, the different sections of society like that. It's just not where the main engine of a revolution in an imperialist country is going to come from. So that is first round of answers.
Can I ask 2 questions?
Yeah. Can this system be competing for service?
Sorry. I can't believe I moved that. I was trying to pause it and then it moved, but there we go.
In an imperialist country is going to come from. So that is first round of answers.
All right. Now it gets really cringe here. It gets really cringe. I'm giving you like a warning. I have never seen the level of cringe we're about to see. Again, people ask me, why, Caleb, did you write a whole book about BreadTube? This is why. Okay, this next bit, I just trigger warning, as they say. This is about to get about as cringe as it can get.
Can I ask 2 questions?
Yeah, you can.
Okay, well, first, hi.
Hi.
I suppose I'm here to represent the furious trans youth.
Okay.
But I had to say, what you said about your interactions with students and how they were unable to provide a positive vision for the future. If you were to ask me my vision for a positive future, I'd be able to describe a series of things that I'd like to see happen, such as universal health care, a democratization of the economy through worker communes and stuff like that. But all of those things that I can imagine, or equal rights amendment, all of those things, those all can be done within the current system. What you've outlined in your speech seems to be a huge description of things that are bad with capitalism, which I agree, but I'm not convinced right now that we need a revolution. And furthermore, I'd like to turn back to you. What is your positive vision for the future? Because so far you have not outlined the structure of the economy that you're planning for, how workers will reap the benefit of their own labor. I'm curious to hear that. And then I have a second question once you're done with that one.
Well, why don't you do both?
Okay, and my second question would be, who are you voting for this November?
That's the question I wanted to ask.
Who else wanted to ask that?
There was a previous thing I'd seen that Bob Avakian said that you should vote for Biden in 2020.
True, very true. The RCP, which generally boycotts elections, endorsed Biden in the 2020 election. I was shocked. I got their press release, and it was this special announcement from Bob Avakian. And I was like, what's this? What's going on? And it was just standard rhetoric. And then it ended with voting for Biden. And I was like, holy shit. But, oh.
So I'd just like to hear, who's voting in the 2024 election?
Okay, so those 2 people asking that. Okay. Oh, you wanted to add? Go ahead.
Here we go.
Can you maybe just... I assume that your answer to the voting question would be that you're not voting for either of them based on your current description. And if that's the case, I just wanted to know, when me and my trans friends are being put on registered and sterilized and, thrown out of our jobs because Donald Trump and his fascists got elected because you didn't vote for the lesser of 2 evils, what will you be doing?
Okay.
See. All trans people will die if Joe Biden doesn't get reelected. So what will you be doing? What will you be doing when all trans people are ruthlessly murdered by the American government because you didn't vote for Joe Biden? I mean, she gives an answer that is way nicer than I would have been to this person. And I would have just said, what planet are you living on? In California, they just passed a law, I believe, that says that if you're a parent and your child wants to be trans, you can't stop them. Okay? They are doing drag queen story hour for kids all over the country. Trans is everywhere. Donald Trump, who's the Republican candidate for president, I was at the Republican convention in 2020 where he talked about how he supported LGBT rights. The crowd applauded. And then Donald Trump said, I'm so happy to see Republicans cheering for LGBT. Like this, where do these people get this? Right? They have this narrative. Oh my God, if Donald Trump gets elected, they're going to murder all trans people. It's going to be horrible. Like Bruce Jenner is a Trump supporter. Caitlyn Jenner is a Trump supporter. I mean, it's just, where do these people get this insanity? Like, seriously. I mean, you could add a laugh. I mean, it's like, this is nuts. This is bonkers. Right? I know trans people get bullied, and I've seen that, and that's wrong. People get bullied for not conforming the right way to the gender, and I'm sensitive to that. And I know that a lot of trans people, maybe their families are not kind to them and don't respect them. I mean, there's issues there. But this idea that the Republican platform is kill all trans people, when they're practically like making it, they're making trans practically a requirement in certain states. This is, yes, it is Trump derangement syndrome, and it's nuts. It's bonkers, right? And, I mean, good Lord. I mean, where do these people get this? They get it from the New York Times. I mean, what alternate reality are they living in, right? I mean, if you go to a church nowadays, right, in middle America, right? I visited a very, very conservative fundamental Baptist church 2 years ago in Chicago, right? It was the church that Reverend Jack Hyles used to preach at when he was still alive, Hammond Baptist Church. And I sat with a comrade and we listened to the sermon at Hammond Baptist Church. You want to talk about a church that is anti-gay, Hammond Baptist Church. And they said that they believed homosexuality was a sin and all of that. But they said, but we welcome gay people here. They're welcome to be part of our community. And we would not. And even they were like apologizing for the fact that they were anti-LGBT, right? So, Hammond Baptist Church, which was at one point a very, very notoriously homophobic church, I'm sitting there in their pew in 2022, and I'm listening to them, and even they are practically apologizing for their anti-LGBT position. So what alternate reality do these people live in where like all Republicans want to murder gay people, all Republicans want to murder trans people? I am opposed to bullying. I'm opposed to hate crimes. I'm opposed to homophobia. People should be able to live their lives as they want. But like this alternate universe, this like triggered universe where everyone is just, on the brink of murdering LGBT people, it's not real. It doesn't exist. These people live in a fantasy world. And if I was up in front of that person, I would just say, you know what? When Donald Trump wins the election in 2024, what will I be doing? I'll be living my life as normal, and I'll be seeing you, and you will. And in fact, your anti-Trump protests will suddenly get way more funding, and your, trans woke stuff will probably get way more funding, and we'll see more of it because they want to fight the president with it. Like Trump was president for 4 years, and this apocalypse didn't happen. Like, I mean, this is insanity. So anyway, point has been made.
I'm going to put these together. We're going to not take more questions yet. We'll get to you, but I don't want to pile more questions since this got very rich and worth taking a minute on. Your first question is, do these things I'm describing really require a revolution? And I could just say, look, on the evidence, people tried to pass the ERA for, what, they started... No, like, it wasn't... Who knows? Okay, we have Carol down there. I'm like, yeah, I'm trusting you. Yeah. So we could do something simple and say, well, it hasn't worked yet. Okay, that's true up to a point. But you're saying, but is there something in the nature of the system that says that it couldn't be done? I can't say that the ERA could never have been passed, but I can say that the oppression of women and oppression based on gender and sexual orientation cannot be wrung out of this system. And look, patriarchy predates capitalism. long predates it by thousands of years, but it did emerge with the division of society into masters and slaves, into oppressors and oppressed, and rulers and ruled over. And the whole notion, which is still playing out today, that women should be reduced to their reproductive capacity or their sexual services, that they're reduced to sex objects or breeders, comes from the need to control private property and inheritance from one generation to the next. It's built into class-divided society.
This is...
And out of that, and bound up with that, is rigidified gender roles, is sexual norms that are very restrictive and repressive. There's complex history.
Marx didn't say any of this. Marxism points out that the family has changed in response to the economic base. That, in hunter-gatherer civilization, there really was no family. The whole tribe was a family. The origin of the family was with the origin of private property. The way families were in ancient Rome, it was the master of the house and all of his slaves and all of his children and all of his wives. And then with feudalism, you got the monogamy, and it was, you were married to a person, and that Marxism says that the way the family has been structured and the way gender roles have been historically has changed as society changes. That's all that Marxism says. Okay, Marxism says that there's not some natural way, some natural eternal way the family is. That the family has changed as the economic base of society has changed. That's it, right? So this radical, all this stuff that she's saying, this is like Western feminism. This isn't Marxism, right? Marx didn't say any of this. Read Engels, The Origin of the Private Family, Private Property in the State. Read Rosa Luxemburg. Read Clara Zetkin. Read actual Marxism. None of them said this stuff. None of them said this. This is all first world gender theory.
But it's woven together. The state interest in controlling these things and religious mandates to control these things are rooted in class divisions. So capitalism inherited this. It didn't create it.
There was plenty of desire to control the family in socialist countries. And I've been to socialist countries and anti-imperialist. The Soviet Union, Stalin glorified the Soviet family. You read New Women, New China by Mao. Gender roles changed in the Soviet Union and China. Women were empowered to do the same jobs as men. Women were leaders of the military and electrical engineers and stuff. But, the family still existed, and homosexuality. Communists all over the world did not support homosexuality until the early 80s. There was no communists anywhere. Stalin, Mao, Cuba, North Korea, none of them were into this LGBT stuff. This is all Western liberal gender theory stuff she's talking here. This is not Marxism. This has nothing to do with the global communist movement. This is Western liberal gender theory stuff.
But now it's built into its structures. The family is the economic unit. The patriarchal family is the economic unit of society.
No, it's not. Not anymore. It might have been in the 50s or something, but not anymore. Families are breaking apart, right? Young people my age and younger don't get married. They definitely aren't even having children very much. The family, I'm sorry, but the family is not the economic unit of society at this point. The family is completely split up by the alienation of capitalism.
It is part of what holds the fabric together. It's how children get reared. It's how their needs get met. It's either one way or the other.
You want to get rid of that? Do you want parents not to raise their children? Like in the Soviet Union and in China, which you both defend as socialist countries, parents still raise their own children. Are you advocating abolishing that? This is just silly. This has nothing to do with Marx or Lenin or Mao or Stalin or any of this. This is just, is she trying to get rid of that? Right? Does she not want parents to raise their own children?
You can't have communal and collective care for children as long as you have private divided classes and people competing for survival.
They did have private care. Children were cared for by their parents in the Soviet Union. What is she talking about?
That's just a change that happened. So you need women in a subordinated role. You need this patriarchal family as long as you have capitalism. And it's been strained, it's been stretched, it's been through struggle, but it keeps snapping back. And that's part of what you have going on right now with this violent reassertion of patriarchy, with the taking away of the right to abortion, with the violent attacks and legal and extra-legal attacks on trans people, LGBTQ rights that were, some of them not won yet, some of them only recently won, but they're being campaigned against very viciously. And what you're describing of the threat of trans people being put on registries, of all the horrific things that
what this person in the audience is describing is a delusion that is in their head, that is part of Trump derangement syndrome. That's what the person is describing. They are describing a delusion.
We're The Handmaid's Tale and stories like that, which are all rooted in real scripture and ideas that have emerged in the real world. All of that is real.
No, it is not.
That's really the stakes that we're looking at. But I would say this. Two things. One is that the RevComs and BA led in making this analysis, I think, have done more to lead people to stand up against and fight this fascism in the way that's meaningful. Going back to when Trump was first elected, I was part of this, Andy Z in the back was part of this. We united with people from throughout society to start a group called Refuse Fascism to drive Trump out of office through mass political struggle, which people have done all over the world to drive out hated dictators and regimes.
And you were supported in doing that by CNN, MSNBC, all the major corporations. You were on the side of the imperialists, and the main reason they wanted to get rid of Trump is because he wasn't warlike enough, and they feared he was friendly to Russia and might not be doing what Biden is doing and trying to escalate with war with Russia.
And through
yeah, so brave to oppose Donald Trump. I don't know how she found the courage to oppose Donald Trump. Oh,
mass struggle, which is the way that actually could have unseated him and reversed not just him, but the momentum in society. We waged massive struggle.
No, he was unseated. All the corporations and banks and all major institutions came together, and the neocons like John Bolton, who'd originally been willing to work with him, turned against him. You were on the side of the richest of the rich in the United States when you opposed Donald Trump. There was absolutely nothing revolutionary about opposing Donald Trump. Nothing.
And have continued to lead people.
Even Mitt Romney voted to impeach Donald Trump. He was a member of Congress from the Mormons, voted to impeach Donald Trump. There was nothing remotely revolutionary about wanting to oppose Donald Trump. With Bush, yes, Bush represented the mainstream of imperialism, etc. But opposing Donald Trump put you on the same side as all of the ruling class, pretty much, except for My Pillow guy, except for Betsy DeVos, the billionaire Amway lady, except for Eric Prince and some of the, I mean, you were on the side of the majority of the imperialists who thought Donald Trump was not good for imperialism.
To stand up against the whole direction he's taking things. In 2020, because people hadn't stood up in that way and in their broad numbers hadn't responded, and it really was the case that he was going for re-election and a second term was going to be just like it will be now, not a repeat of as horrible as the first term was, but a whole much more radical remaking of society. We said, and BA said at that time, as a secondary aspect, while still fighting for people to get into the streets and resist this and not let this go down, as a secondary aspect, this is a rare circumstance where the stakes are so high that people should vote for Biden to create as much of a precedent in the public eye that first, so that Trump doesn't get elected.
And the stakes are still high.
No, I'm not done.
This is, I mean, voting for Biden, I mean, the ruling class was almost doing a color revolution to remove Donald Trump. I mean, it was...
They are high, but I'm going to get to that. This is not as simple. I don't want to be simplistic, but that there was a need to create more difficult conditions for Trump to stay in office through principally struggle in the streets, but also through trying to deliver an electoral defeat. And that barely kept him out. It made a difference, but it barely kept him out. But things have moved on since then. And two things are
barely kept him out. Like, I mean, the entire ruling class mobilized against him. It barely kept him out. Are you profoundly
different this time around? Number one, Trump's not staying out. Even if he loses, I don't think people, if it's very real, the registry, but let's be real, this motherfucker almost did a coup last time.
Oh, laughing is not an argument. I held myself to higher standards, but I'm sorry, Sunsara, a coup involves the military. It does not involve a bunch of rednecks running around the Capitol after the FBI brought them in. Give me a break.
Purge the party of anybody who stood against him. Liz Cheney, who was hardcore, high-up, fascist Republican mainstay, is out.
Good. Liz Cheney is worse than Trump. Liz Cheney's father is Dick Cheney. Donald Trump opposed the invasion of Iraq. He turned to Jeb Bush and said, everybody knows your brother lied to get us into a war. Why are you for Liz Cheney against Trump?
These people are out. He just has kneecapped the RNC head to put in election deniers. These people are not, and
election deniers.
They have way more people armed to the teeth, white supremacists, MAGA fascists, and Christian fascists who are ready for.
Franklin Graham, the son of Billy Graham, just endorsed RFK. You know, he's the biggest evangelical right-winger in the country. He just endorsed RFK. Much of the evangelical crowd turned against Trump. And in fact, Mike Pence, who was like the voice of the neocons and the voice of the Christian right, is the main, turned against Trump. Trump's main opponent in the Republican election was Nikki Haley, who's also an evangelical. No, you're talking about Christian fascist. I mean, the Christian right largely thinks Donald Trump is not a trustworthy ally of Israel. You're wrong.
War to wipe everybody out they hate if Trump gets convicted or if he loses the election. So and Trump says he's not going
to wipe out everyone they hate. Like, what planet are you living on?
Accept an election loss. So one thing that's changed is even with an electoral defeat, things have moved and the fascists have advanced to a degree where they're not going to respect that in the same way, number one. And number two, when you have a chance to actually lift the whole system off the backs of humanity, which is what could open up in the kind of all-out crisis that we're going into, that is more real, and that is going to do more good for the trans people, for women, for black people, for the people of the world, for the environment, than trying to stave off Trump when it's just not going to work within this and let this system recoup and recover. We have a shot to change the whole world. We have a shot to change the whole world, and you don't throw that away. Because honestly, then we'll be sitting here and saying, man, how do we let it pass? The planet is on fire. How do we let it pass? It's not just genocide in Gaza, it's spiraled down into nuclear war. How do we let it pass? Because these Christian fascists are not letting up.
Has she not noticed Candace Owens and how many people in the Trump camp are anti-Israel? Like, has she not noticed that one of Trump's main appeals is telling people he's against these wars, that he doesn't want to escalate? I mean, it's like none of that. Has she not noticed that Biden is weaponizing the FBI?
I really think you're right about what they're intending to do and how serious they are. But
how can you tell? Why are you reinforcing this person's delusion? No, this person is not right. Donald Trump does not want to kill all the trans people. One of Donald Trump's biggest supporters is Caitlyn Jenner. Oh my God.
I do not think you're right to think that they're going to be held off with an election. And I do not think you're right to think that we don't have a shot that we should aim for now to end the whole thing and get to a whole different society. And
how is that going to happen? You're going to go to the protests that CNN is promoting, that the Pentagon is supporting. I mean, did you not see, I believe General Mattis resigned because he said Donald Trump wasn't pro-war enough. And you're going to go to those protests or whatever and do exactly what the mainstream of imperialism is doing and try to replace Donald Trump with somebody who's more of a team player for American imperialism and less of a Bonapartist. And that is going to make a communist revolution somehow. I mean, this is just silliness.
I did paint a picture, and we should get into it more fully, of what the new socialist state would do. It does actually give people the right, the most fundamental right of all, which is to come together and decide together how to utilize the resources of society, how to plan the economy, the education, the media, all of these things in line with digging up and overcoming thousands of years of oppressive relations and traditions chains. And it's very concrete. And it's broken down here. Healthcare, not based on profit. Ending wars and the basis for wars and nuclear weapons altogether. It talks about overcoming and uprooting national oppression and sexism and other forms of inequality. It's very concrete and it's broken down, and you can do it when you untether the economy and people's lives to the system of capitalism and its drive for profit. So that's my answer. And I won't be, just to be very concrete, I won't be voting this year for any of them because I don't think it's going to be meaningful. It's not going to have even the chance of having that meaningful holding pattern, a staying off pattern that it had last time. So you had your hand up, and over here. Yep.
Okay. You know, I think it's kind of important to clarify this question of the new communism, especially with it being raised that, oh, isn't communism really awful in China? Isn't communism really awful in Russia? And this is a little bit of a rhetorical question, but is there communism in China and Russia?
Yes. Well, no, communism is the higher stage. Communism is a world of vast abundance with no state. Communism is a world with so much economic development and so much technological advancement, there's no government. It's not communism. Is there socialism in China? Absolutely. And Russia, at this point, they had a counter-revolution, but they are aligned with the communist world. Then, you know, Putin came in, and their economy is so closely tied in with the socialist bloc at this point. And the Communist Party is a major political party. You know, you can't say that Russia's capitalist in the same way the United States is, or the same way, you know, other countries are. I mean, you know,
yeah. Okay. And you know, what is the difference? What makes, why did we have to come up, or why did Bob Avakian have to come up with a new communism?
Yeah, good question. You know, China raised millions of people out of poverty. You know, the Soviet Union invented space travel and defeated the Nazis. You know, Cuba has had great achievements. You know, socialism around the world has adjusted, and there's new developments. You know, Deng Xiaoping theory, the understanding that you need the market to some degree or other, the Bolivarian road to socialism, and the cooperatives and the different things they're doing in Venezuela and all that. You know, why does Bob have to sit in the United States, you know, all by himself, not tied to any of these movements, and decide he knows better and that all of them are wrong? I mean, you know, I'm sorry. It's like China has raised millions of people out of poverty. The Soviet Union, had huge achievements. Vietnam has had an economic miracle. Bolivarian socialism, Baathism, Gaddafi in Libya had the highest. All these great countries, whole nations have been raised up and industrialized. But no, this guy Bob, who leads a group of less than 100 people, you know, I guess we'll just listen to him. We don't need to study and learn from things that have actually happened. Let's just, you know, I mean, why does he have to invent a new communism? I mean, socialism is unique in every country, right? And that's clear, right? Every country that socialism is implemented, it is a unique model for that country to address its own contradictions, et cetera. But this is why does some guy in the United States who used to have a relationship with China and then cut ties with China over Deng Xiaoping, didn't like Deng Xiaoping, why does he think he knows better than all the people around the developing world who have used these movements, lead millions of people, and used these ideas and movements to actually change people's lives and lift countries up? Why does he think he knows better?
You know, if communism exists in Russia and China, and Bob Avakian was in China. In fact, he didn't live there, but he did an extended visit. And there have been a lot of writings on this question by the Revcoms and Bob Avakian. So I think that a lot of people have to have clarity on that, because we're always told that Russia and communists, or Russia and China are communists, you know, and that really, really does a lot of damage to the idea of a real communist revolution.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the perfect perfect communism you have in your head that's never been applied anywhere is tainted by like actual reality where millions of people get lifted up from poverty. I mean, that's, you want to talk about Trotskyism. You want to talk about Trotskyite jibber jabber. Good night.
Okay, that's a good comment. I might say something about that. And then we have this hand over here.
Yeah, so something I've always been fearful of is the synergistic connection between the far right and activism towards possession of arms. So when you're discussing a civil war and you're discussing a revolution and there being two sides and there being a division, it's concerning to think that the other side is infinitely better armed and more experienced with high quality military weapons than our side might be.
I mean, I actually just find this funny.
So I'm curious to the extent which, given that you've admitted and understand that a civil war and violent conflict is very, very possibly a part of.
You brought this on yourself, my dear. You said your movement is all about violence. You didn't say you want a peaceful transition to socialism. You didn't say, no, we want to end the violence. You said, oh, violence is necessary because there's violence everywhere. You fully embraced violence. And so now there's a dude in the audience who sounds like an FBI provocateur, honestly, who's asking you how many guns you have. You brought this on yourself, my dear. You brought this on yourself, right? If you had answered this in a sensible way, the way communists have generally answered these questions in a sensible way. But no, dear. You said violence. You started out your talk with why you love violence. And this is a fair question. The guy sounds like an FBI provocateur, but anyone who's listening, you set up for this. I mean, this is a fair question.
All of this, to what extent are the RevComs preparing, and what does that look like? And then kind of on top of that, since I assume that you are preparing to some extent, what are you waiting for? You know what I mean? Are you waiting for this election? Because this election is going to draw such a harsh line, and people, whether or not they accept it, will define whether or not we dive into civil war.
Yeah, so after if Trump wins the next election, do you just start shooting? I mean, is that what's going to happen? Like, just kind of lay it out for me. Please tell me, like, the first few buildings you're going to bomb. I'm surprised they didn't edit this out of the tape. They should have, honestly. But it's like, this guy is asking insane questions. Like, if anyone ever showed up at a CPI event and started talking this way, they'd be shown the door immediately, right? You don't have these kinds of conversations, okay? But then again, if you're advocating left adventurism, if you're talking like violence is what you're all about, you're going to get people who show up and ask these kind of crazy questions, all right? Like, if you're a serious working class organizer, the first thing out of your mouth is, we do not want violence. We want a peaceful transition, but the capitalists may not allow it. And if you can't this is...
Why not make a move now? Is there a number of people that you need? Is there a number of guns that you need? Like, what does it actually look like? Is there a pathway by which the RevComs make a first move and actually start this? Like, what does it really look like?
Based on what you said, that's a logical question, right? If you had given a sensible answer, he wouldn't be asking that question. But based on what you said, oh boy. Yeah, no, by the way, just folks, if anyone ever shows up at your event and starts talking that way, remove them immediately. That is FBI shit. I don't know who that guy is asking that question, but if anyone shows up at your event and wants to know how many guns you have and when are we going to start using them, and I'll get them out of there immediately. That's a Fed. That is a Fed, right? That is a Fed right there, right? That is an informant. That is some provocateur shit. Okay. All right. Like, I'm sorry, but like, I don't know why they did not have the common sense to edit that out. That is FBI provocateur shit. We just heard there. Right. And we always make clear, no talk like that is ever allowed at any of our events. No serious communist organization would ever allow anyone to walk in the door and talk that way. Right. Seriously. Right. If someone shows up at your event and starts talking that way, you get them the hell out of there. That's an FBI informant. That is either a really inappropriate, ironic troll, or that's an FBI informant.
Well, a revolution is an act of millions. And it's really important because people have, and in the 60s, people who were righteously outraged by what was happening in Vietnam, for example, or to black people in this country, they went off and did different individual acts of frustration, basically. Small acts that were, guerrilla warfare or excitative things of different kinds. This is not what we're talking about. It actually,
when you tell people that you advocate a violent revolution, that's exactly what it sounds like to them. It's like you're saying, oh, well, there were people that did adventurous stuff in the 60s. But yeah, but you started out your talk by saying you want violence. So I guess, yeah, small acts. She wants it on a massive scale, this is,
In a country that's as powerful as this, with as much of a unified military might and stable political domination over the minds of most of its population most of the time, that's only going to isolate and destroy those who try to do it, and it's going to
yeah, and advocating violence is also going to isolate you, right? Maybe not just doing it, but advocating it.
Demoralize and disorient masses of people. It will not work. So revolution can only be made in a very rare circumstance. It's three main things. One is a crisis among the rulers so deep that they cannot hold it together in the ways they normally do and in the ways that the population is conditioned to accept. So when that breaks down, you have a chance to break the hold and the allegiance of millions to this system. Things start to, and you have a chance for the institutions themselves and even the military to be split apart. Not right away at the beginning, but as this develops. Two, you need millions and millions of people whose desire for radical fundamental change is greater than their fear of the repression that will come down on them, who are demanding a different world and ready to fight for it. And we've seen this at different times, not a revolutionary people, but dimensions of this. You saw some of the potential for this in 2020 with 15 million people in the streets facing down rubber bullets and batons and all this, standing up saying, Black Lives Matter. So you've seen, or in different ways.
On orders from CNN. That was promoted from the highest levels because they didn't like Trump.
In different parts of the world, you see sometimes people's fear gets broken and millions stand up. That wasn't a revolutionary understanding on a revolutionary people, but it gives you a sense of how it could emerge. And then you need a revolutionary vanguard force that is big enough and with the correct understanding to lead those millions with a strategy that could actually carry out the struggle to disintegrate and defeat bit by bit the forces of the other side. Not all at once, but in a process that is actually gone into quite deeply in a pamphlet, Revolution, A Real Chance to Win, 5-part series from BA. So right now, the critical thing that we're trying to wake people up to and organize them into is that we are in a period where that first condition is already ripening.
Okay, so what she's saying here, this is a very, very vulgar misinterpretation of what was said by Vladimir Lenin. And so I am going to put Vladimir Lenin's words on the screen, and we're going to talk about what Vladimir Lenin said, that's a very, very vulgar interpretation of what Lenin actually said. So we're going to put Lenin's words on the screen. She said, you need three things to have a revolution. Let's put what Lenin said on the screen. Right? This is Lenin. To the Marxist, it is indisputable that revolution is impossible without a revolutionary situation. Furthermore, it is not every revolutionary situation that leads to a revolution. What, generally speaking, are the symptoms of a revolutionary situation? We shall certainly not be mistaken if we indicate the three following symptoms. She just bastardized this completely. 1, when it is impossible for the ruling class to maintain their rule without any change, when there is a crisis in one form or another among the upper classes, a crisis in the policy of the ruling class, leading to a fissure through which the discontent and indignation of the oppressed classes bursts forth. For a revolution to take place, it is usually insufficient for the lower classes not to want to live in the old way. It is also necessary that the upper classes should be unable to live in the old way. Meaning that society has gotten to be so unstable, there's been so much instability that the ruling class are fighting with each other and scrambling with each other and bringing working people into the political process and divisions of the ruling class, etc. 2, when the suffering and want of the oppressed classes have grown more acute than usual, right? That means economic crisis. She doesn't mention anything about that, right? And 3, when as a consequence of the above causes, there is a considerable increase in the activity of the masses who uncomplainingly allow themselves to be robbed in a peacetime, but in turbulent times are drawn both by all the circumstances of the crisis and by the upper classes themselves into independent historical action. That's what Lenin's saying, right? So Bob Avakian didn't invent that, first of all, right? Like, let's just get that out of the way. She thinks Bob Avakian invented that. No, that comes from Lenin. And what Lenin is describing here is when society enters a long-term economic crisis and becomes more and more unstable, the capitalists fight with each other, and they start bringing the working class into politics to be their foot soldiers, to try and fight among them to stabilize society. Conditions get worse, and then the masses of people eventually break from being the foot soldiers of one faction of the ruling class against another, and they take on, he says, independent historical action, meaning they suddenly have their own agenda. They're suddenly, putting forward their own vision, their own program. They're not just fighting for one group of capitalists against another, right? That's what Lenin is describing. This is the process of capitalism entering a long-term crisis. The ruling class begin fighting with each other. The workers are brought into politics. Conditions get worse. And as working people are brought into politics because the capitalists are fighting with each other, the working class ends up developing its own vision and its own independent vision and becoming the master of society. That's what Lenin actually said, and she very, very badly presented that.
The rulers are split, and they are only going to get more divided and more at each other's throats. We're not hoping for a civil war. We're just saying that's actually the shape things could.
Yes, you are hoping for a civil war. Your entire speech started out with, "We need violence." Okay, you are hoping for a civil war. Don't say that. Don't say that. How can she say that? She says, we're not hoping for a civil war. No, you had the opportunity to say you want a peaceful transition, but maybe the capitalists won't allow it. You didn't say that. You said violence is good. There's violence everywhere. We have to be violent. You want a civil war, okay? And that's why no one's going to follow you. That's why no one's going to listen to you, and you're not going to build a mass movement because you're going around advocating civil war. You said you don't want a civil war. I'm sorry. You do want a civil war, and that is your first mistake.
Developed that way. And you are absolutely right. The forces of the state and the forces of fascism are way more armed to the teeth, overwhelmingly, than the decent side of society. So this is a big contradiction.
Decent side of society. Oh, yeah. Not, the decent side of society are the liberals who want to imprison everyone who's sympathetic to Russia. The decent side of society are the people who wanted concentration camps for the unvaccinated. The decent side of society is the Biden administration throwing the Uhuru movement in prison. The decent side of society. Wow. I mean, this is like ethnic bigotry almost. Like, people in red states aren't decent human beings because they own guns. What the hell?
But one of the things that we are doing now is to actually, and the key thing now is to wake millions up, change their thinking so that they see this system as the source of the problem and they see a different future that's possible. And so we're fighting to win millions to revolution, and you can't launch or begin an actual revolution before you have all three of those conditions. It would be wrong. It's not what we're doing. But we're working to win the millions. And then what I tried to describe in the talk a little bit, and Bob Avakian goes into more in the social media posts that he has, is how when you have those millions and when the all-out fight for the direction of society breaks out, then what is the strategy that those revolutionary forces would have to engage in that would enable them to win their demand for a different society and defeat all the repression that comes at them? And there's a lot in that context in a future society, in future conditions that haven't emerged yet, but could soon, because of what's objectively developing. And if we do the work to get millions who are won to revolution, where those forces for revolution engage in fighting with the repression that comes down on them that is in pieces. in pieces until it's able to build up the strength and the forces to be able to go all the way to defeat them entirely. So I know that I'm not breaking down every step of it, but I'm trying to get the dynamics. And it's complicated, but there's dynamics. Revolutions ripen. And what we're doing now is saying that if there's not people who rise up, if there's not people who join this revolution and start fighting to wake people up and organize them into this, then that civil war could erupt, and it could just be two ugly sides. It could be just a one-sided slaughter. It's not that we're trying to make it happen. This is already developing independent of us. We're saying out of this crisis, there could be, if people get organized, a chance to take it somewhere good. Or there might not be a civil war. It might just be they sweep in, they win power, they purge the government. This is what Trump is saying, purge the government. He's talked about executing Mark Milley, the former Joint Chiefs of Staff. You think?
Okay. How many Biden supporters or Hillary Clinton supporters did Donald Trump jail when he was president? 0. How many Trump supporters has Biden jailed? Hundreds. How many communists or socialists did Donald Trump jail when he was president? 0. How many communists or socialists have been indicted by the Biden administration for their anti-imperialist activism? 3. Jesse Neville, Omali Yeshitela, and Penny Hess. I mean, this is, the Trump supporter, this is, you can go down the line. I'm sorry that you're talking about Trump making jokes about killing people. Not cool, but Biden's actually doing it. He's killing people in Gaza. He's killing people in Ukraine. He's imprisoning the opposition. He was trying to put Donald Trump in jail to prevent him from running against him. He's jailed hundreds of Biden supporters. He's jailed hundreds of Trump supporters for walking, grandmas who walked into the Capitol. He jailed a guy who didn't even go into the Capitol, who cooperated with the FBI and was outside. It was a reporter for InfoWars. They jailed him. He got a prison sentence. This is ridiculous, right? Enrique Tarrio, he wasn't even he didn't even attend the January 6th protest, and they jailed him for 25 years. And he's putting black communists in jail also. I'm sorry, Donald Trump may have talked more like a dictator or something, but Biden is actually doing it.
He's talking about now what they're intending to do. They could just do this one-sidedly without.
What they're intending to do. Donald Trump was president for 4 years, and he did nothing, right? He did very little. Biden has been president for a few years now, almost 4 years. And during that time, he has done horrific, evil, awful things.
Without it being an all-out fight. This is, that's what happened in Nazi Germany. It wasn't a two-sided thing to a very big degree. So we're saying change is objectively coming, radical change. Right now it's headed towards something really horrific, and a lot of the decent people have their heads up their asses and are sleepwalking through it. And it's headed towards something horrible. But there is a chance through this, if people join this revolution and fight to spread it now, that millions could be woken up and won to this. And then once that happens, and this is the last thing I'll say about this, in the excerpt that I read from BA, from his social media posts, he talked about when the all-out fight erupts for the direction of society, if you do have a revolutionary force, this system has a huge contradiction in the fact that its military and its armed forces are made up of huge numbers of people who are oppressed by this system. And they know that, and they remember this well, and this is something that worries them and something that we need to take note of. Back in the Vietnam War, they actually got to the point because they were losing, because the Vietnamese were kicking their asses and were doing it for a just cause, and that was starting to get inside the heads of a lot of the soldiers because of the anti-war movement in this country, and not most of all, but also very pivotal was the black liberation struggle here. You got to a point where the U.S. could not deploy reliable fighting forces in a lot of their units in Vietnam. And they did surveys among the Vietnamese soldiers, active duty, and especially among black GIs, but not only, a lot of them, they had much higher rates of approval, saying they looked to leaders of the Black Panther Party than to any of the presidents of the US. And so that's a contradiction for them.
Yeah, and the people that you're aligning with right now are more pro-war than the people that you're opposing. Tucker Carlson went and interviewed Putin, the Russian president, and all the people you're supporting want to throw him in prison for doing that. She's living in a time, I don't even think she was even born during the Vietnam War. She's following a man whose mind is stuck in the 70s. And as a result, her understanding of American politics is rooted in the way things were in the 70s. Like, she's completely out of touch. She's almost done. I'm going to let her finish, give you some final thoughts, and I'm going to start answering questions because we've been going on for a while. But hey, the night is young. It's going to be 1 a.m. soon, but I'm sneezing a lot, but I've still got some energy. I've got a lot of super chats, Rumble rants, and super chats to answer. So there you go.
And it's a contradiction that can come into play. During the 2020 uprising, the Black Lives Matter struggle, there was a situation where Black National Guardsmen who were called into D.C. to put down those protests, they were ashamed to tell their family members what they were doing. That wasn't a split yet, but that shows you how things could divide out. When Roe v. Wade was overturned, there were female veterans in this country who burned their uniforms, said, I fought for this country, I believed in it, but what was I fighting for? I'm treated like a second-class citizen. This is a problem for this system. Their military, their forces, their institutions. Right now, you have a lot of people walking out and defecting from Biden because of what he's doing in Gaza. He can't stop doing it because he's a representative of this system.
So why should they defend him from Trump?
But people who are even in his own administration have resigned. Congressional aides to the Democratic Party did something unprecedented and walked out and did a public protest.
That was PR. That was the Democrats trying to keep the Arab American vote. Do you think that congressional aides and White House staffers could go and protest the White House and not get fired for it if they hadn't been told? This is the Democrats trying to keep Muslims voting for them while they murder Muslims in Gaza. That was a PR move. How can you not be that? Are you serious? That was a PR stunt by the Biden administration. Any other staffer that even made a negative comment to the press would have gotten fired. They did that to try and keep the Muslim vote. Give me a break.
On the steps of the Capitol, which has, I don't think that's ever happened. Protesting the people they work for. This is a problem.
Yeah, and they did it because they had permission. Oh my God.
Problem for this system. And so we don't have the numbers now. But there is a basis in the contradictions of this system and the fact that its own institutions are made up of people who are going to be forced to decide, what is this country that's becoming fascist? Some of them will go hardcore for it. Most of them will go along with it unless and until there's another force standing up against it. But if that happens...
And that other force is called CNN, MSNBC, the ultra-rich. Oh, my.
There's a chance for that to crack and for sections of them to actually come over to the revolution. So there's a lot of strategy and strategic thinking in this, but it's serious and it's possible. But a lot of it, all of it, really depends on whether people are spreading this now. Because if you don't have a poll for revolution, it just goes to horror. Mm-hmm. So it's a really good question. Yeah. Oh, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, she's a rodeo clown. I mean, the Democrats need people to vote for them. And as people are getting increasingly interested in socialism and communism, and the Democrats are revealing themselves to be the party of throwing socialists and communists in jail and murdering Palestinians and making things worse, they need to cover their flank. And so Sunsara is there to reinforce the idea that Republicans are the main danger, that somehow by protecting Biden from Trump, you can be revolutionary. I mean, that talk was a train wreck. But if you really want a thorough debunking of this worldview, read my book. I wrote a book called Letter to Bob Avakian. Here, I'll put it on the screen. Let me put it on the screen. Hold on. I wrote a book, Letter to Bob Avakian, and it was my debunking, my analysis and my assessment of the RCP worldview. And I think it's one of the best pieces I put out. I've had books that have sold way more than this, but I feel like it was one of the, you really get an understanding of his strengths and what was effective about him in times past. And you also get an understanding of how his worldview is just completely wrong. I wrote Letter to Bob Avakian. I consider it to be one of the better things that I've written because it's thoroughly ideological. The people who've read it have all really appreciated it. It gives a very thorough worldview. So I would encourage people, if you want to get an understanding of where they're coming from, why they're so wrong about what they're saying, but where it came from and what we can learn from this perspective, I would encourage you to read my Letter to Bob Avakian. It's available on Amazon. Letter to Bob Avakian. It's gotten good reviews. There's a few reviews of it on 5 ratings. All of them, everyone who read it liked it. It's gotten some good reviews. I brought a copy with me last weekend when I spoke to the U.S. Friends of the Soviet People, and people scooped it right up. So that is my advice to you all. All right, folks, those are my opening remarks. Much longer than usual, but I had a lot to react to. But hey, you need something to talk about on here. So why don't we do the roll call, and then I will start answering your super chat questions. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who's with us? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Auckland, New Zealand, Kiwi Corner is with us. Welcome. Micah from Las Vegas. Rupert Fellows in England. Alex Rickle from Oregon. Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati. Ryan in Kansas City. David Rennie from Hamilton, Ontario. Gina from Utica, New York. Ian from Chester, England. Santiago from Mexico. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Luca in Singapore. Gary in Oregon. Zach in Richmond, Virginia. He's got a great TikTok. Sydney, Australia. George Munaz. Emperor Penguin is in Texas. Steve is in Boston. London. Calling. James Britt in Thailand. Tom in Virginia. David in Massachusetts, Mariah in North Carolina, love to all. Thanks, Mariah. John McCarthy in Chicago, Moab in Utah. Welcome, Moab. Or no, you're Richard, but you're in Moab, Utah. Okay, Richard in Moab, Utah. Okay. Al from Sydney, Australia. Jonathan from North Carolina. Welcome, Jonathan. Names and locations. Detroit, First Amendment. Sherry from Cape May. Welcome, Sherry. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us? Anybody else? Names and locations. Dana from Thailand is with us. Welcome, Dana. All right. Now I've got 3 Rumble rants. Yeah, 3 Rumble rants, and I've got 4 super chats. Oh, Fayetteville, North Carolina. To answer, but I do want to encourage you all. Part of the reason that I'm able to do these streams is because I have an extra room here in my apartment. I moved, and my rent here is insane. My rent is too damn high. I have to live in New York City for my job, and I want to have this extra room in order to do the broadcasting, home studio, etc. So I do encourage those of you who like this channel, who watch this channel, to support the work that we do. Donate. Super chats, Rumble rants, support my work on Patreon. That's a great way to support this channel. You can buy the books that I write, etc. All of that helps pay for this channel. It helps me keep this extra room and helps me do all this lovely streaming that I do. So it would be great if you all could send super chats to get me talking. But there we go. So now I'm going to answer the Rumble rants, and then I'll answer the super chats. So first Rumble rant says, did you see the Tucker or Brand interviews with Mike Benz. He's a State Department whistleblower on censorship who gives, I think, more depth and history than the Twitter files. Interesting. Highly recommended. Foundation for Freedom Online. Thank you, Grabane. I have not seen that, but I would love to watch that because the Twitter files revealed that, I mean, again, this is, it kind of fits with what we were talking about earlier. Like, I mean, the idea that the establishment is somehow, that fighting Trump is fighting the establishment. The FBI was literally rigging Twitter to shut up Trump supporters. The FBI was going to the New York Post and going to Facebook and telling them not to publish stories because it would hurt Trump. I mean, the Twitter files and the Hunter Biden laptop and all of that. I mean, it's like we have the government working with Silicon Valley to manipulate people's minds in order to make sure that Trump lost the 2020 election. So we got Chris from West Virginia. Welcome. Alfred in Springfield, Illinois. There we go. Okay. So the next question, the fashion houses, this is Funky. Funky says the fashion houses like Louis Vuitton and Chanel cut up their excess bags and clothes and burn them so no one can resell them. Actually, you don't know how right you are. I saw this in Union Square. In the middle of the winter, the stores near Union Square in New York City, I kid you not, they were cutting up. They were cutting up winter coats. So that homeless people couldn't take them out of the garbage and wear them. I mean, seriously, it happened. I can actually show you a picture. There was somebody I worked with before, and he took pictures of this. And this was in, this was in Union Square. I will show you the pictures of this. If I can find, yes, here we go. I will show you. I will show you the pictures. And yeah, it was a freezing winter, and all these stores near Union Square in New York City were cutting up clothing and throwing it in the garbage because they did not want homeless people to get it because they couldn't make any profit selling it. Here's the photos that were taken. This was some of the cut up clothes that were in the garbage. It was pretty horrible. They would cut up coats before throwing them in the garbage in freezing winters. It was very, very horrible. Very, very horrible. That's one of the images, but you can see the more cut up image. Hold on. Yeah. Here's another one. This is very, very true. Just like, when they throw food away at the end of the night, they'll throw motor oil on it because they don't want a homeless person to eat it out of the garbage. This is capitalism, production for profit, not for social use. That's the capitalist system. So there you go. Cutting up clothes. Yeah. I know for a fact that happens, Funky. You are absolutely right. And they do it with food, and they do it with, there's many examples of this. This is capitalist overproduction, right? And then R.R. Beamer says she sounds like a regular Democrat who today are neocons without knowing it. Well, they're neocons, except it's a different emphasis. The neocons emphasized America, love it or leave it, and kind of social conservatism. These folks emphasize kind of a liberal social justice, but the message is still the same: spreading freedom, overthrowing governments that get in our way. We're all good. The opponents are all bad, and spreading freedom by overthrowing governments. That's the philosophy of Leo Strauss, right? Anne Marie Slaughter is the intellectual who was very much behind the Hillary Clinton State Department. And she wrote an essay where she thought populism was the greatest enemy and the open international system is what she was defending. And if you read Anne Marie Slaughter and what they're all about, I mean, it is the neocon message. It's a little bit of a different spin on it, right? The neocons during the Bush years was about spreading freedom and, you know, America, love it or leave it, and all of that. And now the message is social justice, you know, human rights, spreading human rights, etc. But it's a different emphasis, but it's the same message, which is we're going to spread U.S. imperialism all over the world, and anyone who gets in the way is all bad. And it's the noble lie, and it's Leo Strauss, and that's neoconservatism. So there we go. Hands off Uhuru Legal Fund is able to take donations. Very good. They finally got a site that could get them donations. Open Collective was their source for donations, and they closed down. They've debanked them. The banks have shut them down. They just want to destroy this Black liberation organization. I mean, the Uhuru movement is the most important case in the country right now. I cannot say that enough. Hands off Uhuru is the most important case, right? Every serious anti-imperialist should be supporting the Uhuru movement. If they can outlaw the Uhuru movement, if they can throw them in jail, they're basically making all anti-imperialism illegal. And that must be opposed. That must be opposed. Do you believe that the weapons supply to the cartels from the USA to Mexico is another attempt by the CIA to destabilize countries? Well, see, this is where it gets tricky. Okay, so we know that a lot of the drug gangs that have, you know, destabilized Central America and such have roots in the anti-communist rebel groups of the 70s and 80s, the Contras, they were called, the counter-revolutionaries. And so there's that. Right. The other thing is that for decades, I mean, we're talking decades, like since the 90s, the USA has been giving huge amounts of weapons to the Mexican police. And those weapons end up in the hands of the Mexican cartels. And everybody knows this. And, you know, and we just keep doing it. And I've done stories about this. I actually did a reporting piece about this story because it's just like, you know, I mean, and there's government reports on this. Yeah, we give huge weapons to the Mexican police and the Mexican police give them to the cartels. And and so then we keep doing this. And it'd be one thing if they did it a little bit and then they stop. But it's like for decades and decades and decades and decades, the U.S. government has been giving huge amounts of military grade weapons to the Mexican police. And the Mexican police, who are very corrupt, have been giving them to the drug cartels. And it's just been happening. Now, is it a plan to destabilize the country? I mean, a lot of times things are not like intentional conspiracies, but it's very clear, you know, the USA wrecked the Mexican economy with NAFTA, destroyed their agricultural sector. Instability in Mexico is to America's advantage, right? So, you know, I mean, they're not losing out because of it. The policy isn't hurting American imperialism. I mean, it's hurting Americans, right? Because we have to deal with the cartels on our border. We have to deal with people trying to flee into the country because their homeland's been destroyed. We have to deal with the inflow of drugs, etc. So it's bad for Mexicans. It's bad for Americans, but is it hurting imperialism at all? No, this global system of imperialism benefits from instability in Mexico. And part of that is, you know, it is that a crackdown on immigration will make it much worse. And this is, well, first of all, I'll show my report about this very topic. I did this a long time ago. When I was first working with RT, I did a story on this very topic, and I'm just going to show it on here. But then I'm going to talk to you about immigration because we need to have a nuanced conversation about immigration because, you know, it's complicated.
The UN has called for an investigation into last weekend's violence in Mexico during protests against education reform. 10 people were killed and more than 100 injured in clashes with police.
Ya se descargó esta, güey. ¡Armado!
The police claim they used force after they were attacked by unidentified gunmen. But officers are being accused of gunning down peaceful protesters. Disputes between teachers and the government are ongoing. Despite the notoriety of the Mexican police, they continue to receive support from Washington. Here's RT's Caleb Maupin with more.
Mexico's police are infamous for brutality and corruption. Unsurprisingly, polls show that the majority of Mexicans don't trust local or state police to the extent that armed vigilante groups have formed in some regions of the country to tackle drug gangs.
There's a large overlap between the cartels and the Mexican military and police. Many people on the ground in Mexico have said that the police themselves function as the most notorious gang in all of Mexico.
Despite this reputation, the U.S. continues to arm and train Mexico's police force, with billions of tax dollars and at least 45 American facilities being put forward to assist them. In 2014 alone, 5,700 Mexican police officers and soldiers received training in the United States. But the problem remains, even though some U.S. officials think the program is progressing well.
Our dialogue with Mexico is very good. We are, in fact, talking about the right things. The Mexican government is, in fact, moving in the right direction. And I believe our challenge is to ensure that we've got good coordination.
A report from a wing of the U.S. Department of Justice indicates that the Mexican drug cartels source their weapons from gun dealers and weapons manufacturers in the United States, with some cartels even being able to access automatic machine guns and grenade launchers, the kind of weapons that would be produced for the U.S. military. There have also been cases where the weapons provided to Mexican police have ended up in the hands of drug gangs.
We've seen almost zero coverage in the New York Times and in other mainstream U.S. papers precisely because they don't want to disclose the close relationship that exists between the U.S. military and the Mexican military forces. Just in the past 4 years under Plan Merida, U.S. taxpayers have sent more than $2.5 billion of our dollars to fund the Mexican military, aid to fight a drug war, which is nothing less than a war against the popular forces of Mexico.
Police brutality and corruption is not one of the issues that comes up when President Barack Obama meets his Mexican counterpart.
Welcome once again, President Peña Nieto, as well as his delegation. It's appropriate that our first meeting of the year is with one of our closest allies, neighbors, and friends.
And moreover, Mexico, a close ally and neighbor, can expect to keep receiving Washington's help in the form of weapons and money for the Mexican police force. Caleb Maupin, RT.
Yeah, But now I do want to add that the problem with the way immigration is discussed in the United States is that on the Republican side, you just get fear of immigrants. You get bemoaning of the hardship that's created, right? And all the things that Republicans advocate doing about the crisis of mass migration would make it worse. Number one, they complain about crime. Right? Is there a lot of crime? Do cartels smuggle people across the border, et cetera? Absolutely. However, it's worth noting that if you make immigrant communities afraid to call the police, if you force immigrant communities deeper into the shadow, if you have, you tear apart families and all of that, you're going to make the problem of crime much worse. You're going to create an atmosphere where those cartels will really flourish. Second of all, if you build a big giant wall, right, so you make it really hard for people to walk across the border, well, what's going to happen is those illegal organizations that smuggle people across the border and bribe corrupt officials and all of that, they're going to flourish. They're going to get stronger because it's harder to just walk across. I mean, it's like all the things that conservatives want. And then one other thing conservatives bring up, very good point, that immigrant workers don't get paid minimum wage, and they work for less than minimum wage. And that's true. And that's illegal. In the United States, it is illegal to pay someone less than minimum wage. And you'll notice that that it is it is driving immigrant workers into the shadows makes them less likely to step up and demand better pay, and that immigrant workers have gone on strike for better conditions, etc. So all the things Republicans want to do about immigration make all the things they complain about immigration worse, right? All the things they advocate doing would make crime flourish, would make illegal crossings by cartels flourish, would make the problem of workers not getting paid and undercutting, it would all make it worse. The problem with the Democrats is the Democrats, they just celebrate immigration. They don't acknowledge that there's a problem, right? And there is a huge problem. The fact that people can't live in their home country, the fact that dead bodies are found along the U.S. border, the fact that, I mean, this is a big problem. The fact that Mexico's economy has been wrecked by the United States, this is all a big problem. So we have to have a nuanced approach, which is that the solution to the crisis of mass migration is development, raising people up out of poverty. We need industrialization and economic development. That's the solution. I'm starting to get really tired here. We're past the 3-hour mark. So I got two more, or I got one more. And it's Caleb, can you speak about Bolshevik communism? No, because I would refer you to a very important article by Winston Churchill, where Winston Churchill said that there are two forces among the Jewish community, Bolshevism and Marxism. Or I'm sorry, Bolshevism and Zionism. And that Winston Churchill said that the British government should fund Zionism as opposition to Marxism. And I would also encourage you to go and read what Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin both said about Zionism. Go and read Lenin's essay on the bond, right? Go and read Lenin's essay on Bundism, where he says that not only Zionism, but any attempt at creating a Jewish nationality or celebrating a Jewish culture or identity is inherently reactionary, right? Go and read Lenin's words in this essay on the Bund, right? Lenin says that Jewish nationalism and Zionism of any kind is contrary, is absolutely opposed to Marxism. Go and read On the National Question by Stalin, where he says that Zionism is a reactionary trend of the Jewish bourgeoisie. This thing that anti-Semites say, that communism and Zionism are all a big part of a conspiracy, that's just bullshit, okay? After World War II, there was a brief moment where the Soviet Union supported Israel, and that was a huge mistake. But for the overwhelming majority of, from the time of the Russian Revolution, before the Russian Revolution, right up to World War II, communists were always opposed to Zionism, and Theodore Herzl and the Zionists knew that, number one. Second, the Palestinian resistance was funded by communists. Mao met with the Palestinian resistance. The Soviet Union gave weapons to the Palestinian resistance. 1967, the Palestine Liberation Organization was recognized by the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was the main backer of Arab nationalism and Abdel Nasser in Egypt and Saddam Hussein in Iraq and the Ba'ath government of Syria. Like, people who try to claim that communism is a Jewish conspiracy are completely, that's just a stupid fascist claim, okay? There were a lot of Jews that were interested in communism, and Zionists knew that and opposed it. And Zionism largely argued, and the Rothschilds funded Zionism because they wanted to push Jews away from Marxism, right? And the idea that communism, Marxism, and Zionism are the same thing is just so ridiculous. It's just not factually accurate, okay? And and people just want to believe this. And you can read what Zionists have written about how much they hated Marxism, and you can read what Marxists have written about how much they hated Zionism. You can read what Lenin said strongly in opposition to Zionism and even to Bundite Marxism, right? You can read what Marx wrote an essay on the Jewish question, which has some passages in it that actually sound somewhat anti-Semitic. You know, I mean, you know, some of the stuff he says. I mean, Marxists historically have been the biggest opponents of Zionism. So, you know, and this has come up on a lot of recent streams, and it's just some things are true and some things are not. Okay. And this Anthony Sutton conspiracy, the Bolshevik Revolution was all a big conspiracy by the Jews or something. That's anti-Semitism, and it's stupid. It's just stupid. Right. And I've written about this, about Jacob Schiff did not fund the Bolsheviks. Right. You know, I've seen people claim, oh, Trotsky was a Broadway actor who was hired by Jacob Schiff. That's bullshit. Right. I mean, you know, Trotsky was living in New York City. He had a magazine called Novi Mir, and Trotsky didn't become a Bolshevik until July of 1917. And then he became the biggest traitor to Bolshevism. So that's bullshit. Thank you, Chris, for your support. I do appreciate it. But yeah, I mean, I've talked about this a lot on recent streams. I'm actually quite tired because we're past the 3-hour mark. You know, tonight's topic, it was interesting a little bit. I mean, it gave me an opportunity to talk Marxism. But somebody else, Tyler, actually sent me another video that I should respond to. So, you know, I might do that later, but, you know, I mean, reacting videos are good. You know, you got to respond to stuff. But anyway, folks, my allergies are kicking in, and it's past the 3-hour mark, and I should probably start saying goodnight. But it's been fun. I'll be back, probably tomorrow night. If not, you know, the next night. I do these streams as much as I possibly can. I thank you all for being a supportive and friendly audience. And, you know, yeah, it's been fun. I'm going to put on the closing music. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.